This is Film Tech.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back.
Oh, I don't know if it's on, but I like it.
You know, we're sitting here like a couple of regular fellas. We're going to make film history.
Can you say that again? Just the way you say it.
Poor baby is starting to lose their hair.
They won't know what they're looking at or why they like it, but they'll know they want it.
It's not real time, it's showtime. Are you guys ready?
Hello there again, everyone, and welcome in to actually episode 210 this time, as I mistakenly said episode 210 in front of the Parasite episode, and that in fact was episode 209, and I have now taken care of that error.
It's okay, we forgive you.
Thank you very much, Toussaint. Anyways, this, in fact, is episode 210, and I am Alex Diekman, along with Toussaint Egan, who you already heard from.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, it's not really having you. You're a part of this every week.
I know, but it still feels like such a privilege to be able to share this podcast with you two.
Oh, it's getting to be that time of year when
Yeah.
the feelings come out.
Yeah.
Nick Cheney, as always,
Hello
here as
there.
well.
Hi.
Most of the time.
Almost
every episode.
Every episode except for the baseball episode.
Okay.
Not that I'm counting. I just want to say, since you're offering corrections, I will very quickly offer corrections for things I've said
Oh, boy.
in the last
Get out the notepad.
month of episodes.
Okay.
First of all, I don't think white people have it bad. Second of all,
What are you
I
doing? What happened when I was gone?
Oh, boy.
Oh, man.
It's
I still
so
haven't heard those
weird what I
episodes. They're not
will
up
say
yet.
and what I will not say when there is a black man in the room or not.
Oh,
It's,
my God, Nick.
it's like you're my moral conscience. You can't leave me.
Yeah, I'm like Jiminy Cricket.
I'm kidding about that comment, at least. I will offer two corrections on my part. I randomly said Devon Sawa in one episode being in the Sean Byrne movie. I was thinking of other 90s hunks, Ethan Embry.
Okay.
And also, I will correct the fact that I was talking about The Wicker Man when we were talking about our favorite horror scenes. And I said Anita Ekberg instead of Britt Eklund, which a friend of the show, Sarah from Minnesota, pointed out. Which kind of makes me like her a little less as a person and as a friend for, correcting me like that.
But
It has to be said. So, if this is what you want, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
yes, that's pretty great. So, on this episode, we are going to talk about the newly released Martin Scorsese film, The Irishman. I don't think that I have to really state that much that I am super pumped to talk about this, and I am leading the charge on this being an episode we're doing. I think that'll probably be very apparent when we actually start talking about the film. But we all got together and watched this and made a whole evening out of it, and we'll talk about that as well. But first, let's do a little week in review.
Okay.
I think that'd be fun.
Yeah.
So who wants to go first?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Excuse me. So sorry. Kind of going along with the theme of this episode, in that we're about to later on talk about a movie that's a very controversial Netflix production, in the sense that, people are dredging up the conversation of what you should see in theaters versus what you should watch at home. I went to the theater to see a different Netflix production, screened on 35 millimeter, which was Noah Baumbach's new film, Marriage Story.
The reactions are just...
This is
I
beautiful.
honestly didn't know what film you were talking about until you said it.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And this is the one that stars Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson.
I
and
know those names.
Yeah, and Devon Sawa and Anita Ekberg.
Oh, God.
Fuck you, Sarah. And this is about a married couple as they are getting a divorce. So it, the title is very ironic because...
Deliberately so.
Yes, but I don't think it's actually misleading. I think part of the genius of the structure of the film is that without showing any flashbacks, we genuinely do get a sense of what their marriage is like, in good and in bad, and we see what drew them to each other, and obviously what drove them apart. But we see all that as they're facing this separation and their way out, so to speak, and. There's going to be always talk whenever a movie like this comes out as to if the scales are balanced. Are we seeing more from one person's perspective? Is one person more justified in their actions,
Who won?
Well, and I think that's actually usually a point of topic, even in the best examples.
Think of like Kramer versus Kramer and something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. And I actually think this movie did a pretty good job. I think it's transparent that it is from Charlie's point of view, played by Adam Driver, but that doesn't mean that the sympathy lies solely with him or that he is in any way the moral center of the movie. I think it's more just Noah Baumbach tipping his hand that he's a male, so he's technically writing it from that point of view.
I was going to say, it's coming from a male perspective anyways, from a script point of view.
But incredibly generous, and if not, I think the other person was slightly more sympathetic at times. And so I very much enjoyed it. The two performances here are fantastic. Adam Driver is, as always, amazing, and he's no different in here. He, at one point, sings a Sondheim song, one of the best Stephen Sondheim songs ever written. Unlike Joker...
I was going to say, is it better than the Joker performance?
Where it actually makes sense as to, A, why he would know every lyric to the song, and B, why he would sing it at the moment he does in a public setting. I mean, come on, Send in the Clowns is not even fucking about clowns. Just that movie. Okay, anyway.
We don't need to go
We've
back
already,
there. We did.
Yeah.
But
listen to our Joker episode if you'd like to learn more.
That's true. But he's fantastic. Scarlett Johansson is probably the best role she's ever done, I think. Other than maybe Under the Skin, but that's like such a different...
She's better than... I mean, I guess she's not, especially since it's Woody Allen, not as good, but I feel like she's pretty solid at Match Point, too. But...
she's fantastic in that. But Woody directing her is in no way favorable to her acting talent, I think, than someone like Noah Baumbach.
That's pretty much where my preface was coming from.
Absolutely. And that's one of my all-time favorite movies. But no, Marriage Story is amazing. It's beautiful. If you get a chance to watch it on Netflix, I absolutely recommend everybody give it a try, even if you've never watched a Noah Baumbach film.
And that it'll probably be out after this episode is dropped, because that's early December,
early December. Yeah. It's only in a limited run for a couple weeks, and I was lucky enough to go catch it at the Music Box Theater here in Chicago.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, I gotta say, it's one of those things where the other great thing, before I pass it off, is that the supporting cast is great. I actually did not know who was in it beyond the two, because I didn't look that hard into it. But the lawyers, there are 3 lawyers that crop up at various points, they're probably the only other important characters in this story, because that's literally the whole structure of the movie is the ongoing kind of legal mediation between these two people, and how that system completely dehumanizes both people and both parties at the table, while also threatens to undermine what good that was shared in a marriage. You know what I mean? It's basically threatens to rewrite the narrative in a way that is not fair to either person, and it's a very ugly system, and while maybe necessary from a one-sided point of view, there's got to be a better way, and until we find it, it's just going to break a lot of people, and a lot of therapy bills are going to be needed, I think, even when two people have the best intentions at heart. But the 3 lawyers, really quick, are played by, in order of like screen time, most to least, Laura Dern, who's fantastic in here. She's probably the funniest character in the movie, because she kind of has this very feminist, empowered swagger to her that totally owns any room she's in, but also goes a little overboard in some scenes when even Nicole is like, I don't know that I consider Charlie to be that bad. And she's like, that's not a perspective we can have if this is what we're doing, whatever.
So is she... Because here's the thing, and I'm guessing that maybe from the way you're explaining her character, this becomes a thing. But in terms of lawyers muddying the waters, trying to push their bottom line up a bit.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is pretty much what, a lot of what's happening at the worst of these two people happens when they're silent at the table, and the lawyers are taking secondhand accounts from the people, which are technically true stories, but are missing any context of a real life humanity
Spinning the
lived
narrative.
within. Yeah. And so Adam Driver's Charlie's lawyers there's two of them that he goes to meet. One is played by Ray Liotta, which I haven't seen in forever, and he's fantastic in this. He has not skipped a beat, and he's the very cutthroat male lawyer. But before he goes to him, he does meet with a very grandfatherly and just too nice lawyer played by Alan Alda. And he's fantastic too. He has maybe one of the funniest lines of the whole movie when Charlie's like talking to him, and they're not doing very well during one of the mediation meetings, and so they take a sidebar, and he's like, and Alan Alda goes, if I was defending you, and Charlie's like, you are defending me. He's like, no, I know, but if I was, and he just continues to talk. And so anyway, it's a funny movie, it's a heartbreaking movie, but definitely it's not a depressing one by the very end. There's no Hollywood reconciliation or anything like that, but you do genuinely feel that maybe these people are going to be in a better space once they've got through everything that I don't know that they had to do, because some of it goes a little too far, which is the point, but that they're going to learn from this as they move forward, and it's a very touching story.
So two things.
Yes.
One, kind of random, but Ray Liotta is great in Killing Them Softly.
Oh, yeah.
And especially when the story is being recounted about him explaining to all of his gangster friends about how he ripped off the one guy, and how he's like, yeah, it was me. Everyone thinks it was this person, but it was actually me. And it was like, oh, that's such a mistake.
Yeah.
Shouldn't do that.
Ray Liotta in this movie is so great, and I'm just...
It's mostly because he's not in a Shantix commercial, so that's
yeah,
good.
he's stepping a little bit above that in this picture. I almost didn't say that he was in this movie. Well, not that he was in it, but a lot of people are calling his character a spoiler, because the structure of this movie is such so that Charlie and Nicole have to go see different lawyers, obviously, so that way they can be represented and have a meet-up. So the whole idea is that Charlie goes sees Ray Liotta first, and he's like, this is not what I want, because he's too cutthroat, and he does. Whereas Nicole goes and sees Laura Dern, and Laura Dern basically kind of manipulates her into, this is what you want, whatever. And so then he goes to Alan Alda. So the two of them are not matched whatsoever. So a lot of people are taking the fact that halfway through the movie, Charlie very unceremoniously fires Alan Alda. In fact, it happens in a scene you don't see, so that the next time he shows up to court, it's kind of a surprise that Ray Liotta is just there. And I don't believe that that's a spoiler myself, so sorry if I ruined it for everybody, because I just think the drama is way more than plot twists like that. I mean, there's a million things going on in this movie on a character level, and that's really why anybody should watch it. But I will say that that's kind of a lot of people point to that as the ground zero of Charlie's ultimate mistake, and when he lost the upper hand of having any moral, because of how much he cites it in the beginning as not wanting to be that guy. But I think you can watch the movie and also see what other choices you have, So
I'm looking forward to watching it.
I recommend it.
And with that being said, I will ask this, as you are a single person.
Yes.
Not married, at least, and I am a married person.
Correct.
So, even though myself and my wife, Emily, I believe, have a very happy, healthy marriage.
I believe it, too.
Do you
I believe.
Do you think this would be uncomfortable for married people to watch?
So that's the other thing, is that I think some movies like this definitely are. I think this one is ultimately good, and not good enough, but supersedes that question where there's no way a married couple can watch it and not have a conversation. But I don't think it's going to be naturally antagonistic.
Questioning your own...
Yeah, because this is it gets at a lot of truths about marriage. At least I believe it does. but it's also an ultra-specific story that hinges on a lot of things that don't come up all the time during marriages. One of the biggest contesting things between the two of them is one wants to live in one state and the other one wants to live in another state for various reasons and for good reasons. So, like, I wouldn't say that there's a lot of stakes here, but there's much more than just two people who can't sit on the couch next to each other, and you know what I mean, that kind of thing. It's more just that two people have two different lives that never maybe should have.
Okay.
Whatever.
Well, then that feels more like there's an actual reason why this is happening, and not just
right. Exactly.
Something set them off, and now they're in divorce proceedings.
Oh, for sure. But there's definitely never any doubt that they loved each other for good reason at one point. Okay. So I would say there are much more uncomfortable marriage movies out there. One amazing one is called 45 Years by the director Andrew Hay.
I've heard of that, and Emily has said she's wanted to watch that, and I've been a little...
Oh, man, please
hesitant?
do. Watch it with her. You can borrow it. Let me know.
Okay.
That is my personal nightmare. Because Charlotte Rampling, I won't spoil anything about it, but the final scene is a shot of her face. Or at least her face is in the shot, I should say. And her acting in that shot alone, besides the fact that the movie is very good up until that point, if I'm ever in a situation where someone's making that face and there's a shotgun nearby, I will blow my fucking brains out because no one deserves that. I don't mean deserves to look at. I mean just like
no one deserves to look at that.
To have someone be in your life that you made feel that way.
Damn.
It is. That's an uncomfortable movie in the most amazing way possible.
Okay. So, I think I will take
Please
the baton. I may at some point. We'll see. Since you were talking about Adam Driver, I will go next and talk about an Adam Driver film I just watched, which is the Scott Z. Burns film, The Report, which is basically surrounding the torture report that was put out by the Senate in 2014, I believe. Anyways, so Adam Driver plays a real-life person named Daniel Jones, who's basically just a staffer looking to cut his teeth, and is involved...
Oh, does he?
Yeah. He's involved in various different... And there's a real nice, brief, 10-minute overview of his career before he got involved in the torture report. Anyways, so you see his initial reaction with John Hamm. You see his initial reaction with Annette Bening, who's playing Dianne Feinstein in this film, and how he ends up in the situation to be the one leading the report. So this film debuted at Sundance earlier this year and got a very good reaction from the things I read when this was there in January of 2019. So I was on my radar early on this year. I was interested. I, for the most part, like Adam Driver as an actor. And the content here was interesting to me, specifically because anything involving the idea of admission of incorrect policy. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but anyways, just this idea of going back and doing some sort of self-evaluation at some point. Which
I really need to break that suspect's legs?
Well, I especially in this, because the idea of the government being run like a business is really, especially in this era of how businesses are run, is just so horrifying.
Yeah.
The idea of, well, we only want positive energy, everybody is on the same page, and no one's allowed to have a thought, and we're just going to stick with this no matter what.
Synergy.
Yeah.
Isn't that called groupthink? Isn't that what led to the Challenger explosion?
That's one way to look at it, Toussaint. Some people would call it
I would say
loyalty.
That is the way to look at it.
So anyways, this film basically just outlines him and his basically involvement with the torture report, and as it is called in the film, the actual title of the film is The Report. as the
redacted report.
Torture from the actual title is actually pretty good and pretty effective, I think. And Adam Driver is giving a really solid performance in this film, and other people are good here, like Annette Bening, as I previously mentioned, and there are some other actors who show up who are also quite good as well, like John Hamm.
I was going to say, did you enjoy him in it?
He was okay. He's definitely a super minor character. I wouldn't put him on cameo level, but he's
definitely
got about 4.5 minutes of screen time.
Like Tracy Letts showing up for Ford versus Ferrari, despite the fact that the trailer kind of made it look like he would maybe be a driving force.
Which there's quite a bit of that.
Driving force.
Because
I get it. It's a good pun.
If you look on paper, this film has got a knockout.
I didn't mean to change gears. Sorry.
Oh, son of a bitch. This film's got a knockout cast on paper because it has Adam Driver, Annette Bening, John Hamm, Corey Stoll. It's really solid.
Yeah.
Michael C. Hall makes an appearance here. Yeah, I know.
My goodness.
Yeah, so...
The whitest cast I've ever heard.
Well, there's a lot of white people in
No,
Washington.
just all those people just, I don't know, for some weird reason, strike me as, like, looks-wise, as, like, just the most bland white people ever. And they're all very talented.
Yeah.
Actually.
But so just have to couch that.
They're
all
both talented.
They're all very talented and also very, very, very pale. Almost translucent,
They
you might
are
say.
gorgeous because they're in Hollywood, so they'd have to be, and they are very talented people, so I don't really mind saying that they are weird amalgams of what quote-unquote white people look like.
But they are.
They are, in fact, white. So, yes, I decided to make use of my Amazon Prime subscription and watch this film as it is now there, so you can see Adam Driver films on 2 streaming services in December, which is great. That's where we're at.
Glad you brought that up, because I was under the impression, as I told you earlier, that wasn't coming out until like mid-December or something.
Okay.
So I'm probably going to go watch it this weekend.
No, okay. So I was a fan. The structure of the film, when we start in events that have happened in the past, Adam Driver really has access to emails and documents, but he can't actually physically talk with anybody because that is off limits. But anything that's happened in the past is okay, although there are some things that are kept from him and some things that end up arriving to him that it gets all into the idea of ethical. Is this able to be used in the report? Should this be used in it? Could this stand up in a court of law? Yada, yada, yada. Which all to me is very intriguing in terms of this idea of almost him having the burden of proof to prove everything that has happened with the Central Intelligence Association, or what is it? That's what CIA stands for, right? I don't remember what the A is.
Central Intelligence Agency.
Agency, there it is, not association.
Yeah.
Might as well be. Anyways,
Yeah.
so it just, he's got the decks pretty much stacked against him as he's doing this almost self-grading of what happened in all of the events that came after 9/11. And also this film asks a lot of very interesting questions and has answers for them as well. So if you're against a film that picks a lane in terms of how it feels about its subject matter, then maybe this isn't the one for you. I thought it was fascinating because I am on the side of what this film is trying to say. And at the same time, the idea of going through the structure early on in this film where he is reading these documents and then you actually just go straight into the events as they are transpiring that he's reading about. So you're seeing the torture, you're seeing a lot of the decisions being made by heads of the CIA and the people who were involved in these enhanced interrogations that were happening. And the idea that, and I think this is one of the most important parts of the film, that people taking advantage of other people when it comes to wartime possibilities of, well, this works because we're scientists, and that being like, oh, that sounds great. They're scientists. Mm-hmm. They said it works.
Yeah,
and
which is funny because when scientists say climate change,
well, it's all in the eye of the beholder, right?
Oh, yeah.
Whatever they say something that they want to hear, it's okay. I think the most important part of this for me, and something that is made very apparent in the film, but I find just fascinating, is the idea of a group of people being their own overseers is so concerning.
That's how this happens.
I mean, just the idea of, well, we can deliver these results, and also we're going to deliver all of the oversight for our own findings. And the fact that nobody really had any questions about that is so frightening. But it's all in the idea of, well, do you want to catch Osama bin Laden or not? And then the other question about this, because the ethics of torture and of it being worthwhile and necessary is definitely there throughout this film and is a big part of the first, hour or so. But this film really gets at me and really became what it was when the film started to ask the question about, okay, if that one group answers the question and says, oh, we're sorry about this, we did this, and this happened, but it also led to the capture of Osama bin Laden and other terrorists, but it actually didn't, that's a really bad place to be. And also, too, I mentioned to you earlier, both of you guys earlier, about how I saw some similarities between this and another great film called Spotlight. But the idea of saying, oh, there were some bad apples, but we took care of them. This is not a systemic problem. This is down to the people who are actually doing it. That is such a dangerous...
It's funny how it always comes out to shake out like that, right? It's not systemic, no.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, too, because I feel like without having even seen the movie, that's even more erroneous in a situation like this than a situation like the Catholic Church, where that was definitely a fucked up situation. But, I don't think the Pope went around telling people to be a pedophile. They were just completely okay with it. But the idea of bureaucracy and military is to follow orders. So the idea that anybody can act of their own accord in that kind of a system is insane. So,
yeah, and the idea of it, and I think it is important to remember, and not because I think that anything that happens in this film is right or should have happened or anything like that, but I feel like in the months following 9/11, it's very important to remember that people were all in on whatever gets the job done, we're good with it.
Yeah.
It's fine. And I think
that was the culture's temperature.
Yeah. And then the last thing I will say, and again, I think this is a very, very good film, and I really enjoyed it. This film makes a very clear thought early on, and it's really not mentioned much throughout the film, but it's very important, that basically in its attempts to have these enhanced interrogation methods, it's very possible that they just were delaying actually acquiring real evidence that could have led to the capture or killing of Osama bin Laden or other terrorists, because they spent so much time listening to this bad logic about that they're not actually asking the right questions or even talking to the right people. And a lot of it is because the CIA felt really embarrassed that they had the information on 9/11 and did nothing with it. So they didn't want to fuck up again, and by doing so, they fucked up even worse. So, yeah, and again, this is a film that is coming from a very slanted perspective, I would say, so I would not necessarily take every action that happens in this film as total 100% truth. But at the same time, it's definitely a truth I pretty much believe in, too. So, yeah. It's
Can I
very
say
good.
two things really quickly about The Report, a movie I've never seen? One...
Do you plan on seeing it?
I do, for sure. Okay. One, I love how it's written, directed by Scott Seaburns, right? And
he's a Steven Soderbergh disciple.
He is, and I love their relationship together. He wrote The Informant for him and some others like Side Effects or whatever. And I love how before this came out, it certainly sounded like The Informant. Not the quirky comedy, but the kind of weird digging into a thing, bureaucratic. drama, so to speak.
It's certainly a much different tone than Informant.
For sure. But I love how, after that being one of my all-time favorite movies and one of the best writer-director collaborations, whatever, I love how 2019 comes along, and he also wrote The Laundromat that Steven Soderbergh directed this year, and I feel like Steven approached him, because it's been at least a couple of years since they worked on a movie together, and was like, "Hey, Scott, have you got any scripts lying around?" And he was, like, writing the report, and he kind of looked and panicked, like, yeah, I've got the Laundromat. It's about the Panama Papers, and then just, like, put the script for the report, like, in the drawer.
I'm keeping this one for myself.
Yeah, because the Laundromat was shit, and I say that as someone who very much loves Steven Soderbergh. That was just an unfortunate misfire, but that this would come out in the same year. It just makes me chuckle to think he's like, yeah, this one's mine, which sounded like was well earned that he was able to. It
was. Soderbergh was a producer on this,
yeah.
So
no,
that may just be a Steven Spielberg. Yeah, why don't you throw my name on there?
I don't know though. I will say Soderbergh is kind of an actual, I don't know, set presence a lot of the times. Like, he was the DP on the Magic Mike sequel, despite the fact that he wanted no credit for that.
Well, he was retired, so.
Well, I know that, but I know, like, he goes for that faux, whatever. But I think he's actually pretty generous with his collaborators, that he genuinely finds those kind of projects. So I'm not saying he was on the set or anything like that of the report, but I would buy it more from someone like him doing it than I would from, like, Spielberg coming out of the Amblin office. So, nope, I'm going back inside.
Oh, this is good. I guess I'll put my name all over this. Yeah. This isn't good. I'll see you guys later.
Yeah.
Tucson?
All right, cool. I didn't watch any films this past week, but I did watch some television.
All right.
So I've now watched all of the 3 current episodes of season 4 of Rick and Morty, which, just started like 3 weeks ago. I don't like them.
No,
I don't like them. I like the first episode. I think the premiere for season 4 is all right. While you guys were talking, I was like trying to like do the mental math, like what did I watch in the past week? And I was like, oh, I watched Rick and Morty. It's like, oh yeah, I was like, I remember the first episode, and I forgot actually what happened in the second half of the second episode, and I really didn't like the third episode, so I have to like round it up to like, yeah, I'm not feeling it so far. Like, it's just I wouldn't say that it's circling the drain. I would say that it is just I'm trying to find a softer way of like of making that point, because I don't think it's as bad as that implies.
It's going in the wrong direction.
I think that
diminishing returns.
It might be diminishing returns. I feel like this is like the second episode was all about re-emphasizing how lonely and shitty of a person Rick is, right?
But they've never done an episode like that.
Yes, they have. Yes, they've done that a couple of times, and it comes to such a point now that like you can only mine so much pathos out of this character and try to like play this balancing act of them just being like this charismatic asshole versus being like them in their inner life being just like so just awful to themselves overall. As awful as they are to other people, they're even more awful to themselves. And it's just like at some point this has to come to a head where we actually learn what happened to this particular character that made them this way. And I feel like that's going to be a turning point for the series, not just in sort of like justifying how much they are laying into this particular thread, but also how will this show then work as a comedy if we actually get to that point, that necessary point that we have to get to. Like, how will the dynamic between those two characters change, because they're both voiced by Justin Roiland, and it's all about sort of the comedic sort of like repartee of these two sort of clashing personalities. Now, obviously, like Morty's character has matured a lot from the first season and has stopped being such a punching bag for Rick's character and has actually become more worldly and more jaded and more self-assured, and that's been really interesting.
But from what I understand, I mean, I've seen the first season and a half. I stopped midway through season 2.
Season 3 is good.
My problem with Rick and Morty in general was that I actually liked season 1, so I don't think it's like a bad show or anything like that.
Yeah, season 1's like up
there.
But
I once I got to the second season, and Dan Harmon as a writer was already repeating himself and doing sequels to, which I know he did in Community, and I love Community.
Are you talking about interdimensional television?
Yeah.
Something. Yeah, that's actually one of the weakest episodes of the.
But it
the
told
series
me
so
that I
far.
thought that was the direction of the show in general when it comes to both comedy and drama. That maybe they were gonna. I don't know. It was just
It
because
course corrects a little bit
Okay.
in the third season. I'm just sort of like let down by these initial episodes because one, the entire season is supposed to be 10 episodes. They're only airing like 5 episodes because apparently they don't have the other half like ready yet. It's like a rolling start where there's going to be like the later episodes and a half, and it's sort of already promised for the fact that they were renewed for like 70 plus episodes, like at the end of like season 3. So in theory, there should be shorter and shorter increments of time between like these episodes being written, how they're produced and airing and stuff like that. It's just there's the question of like whether this show can actually like last that longevity, because I know that it's sort of like coasting.
what show can? Like what I mean by that is what show can last that long in projected? You know what I mean? Like
in projection,
Because-
I would say that you can't really like you
you
can't
should
solve
never
for that.
put that on any show.
But animated television has done that before. Like
And I
in the
guess
case of like
The Simpsons just keeps getting renewed, but they're not they don't have like a 10-year contract or something like that.
I'm not talking about The Simpsons. I'm talking about Futurama. I think Futurama actually like
But from the second season, they didn't get. They had to keep fighting to stay on the air.
Right, yeah.
And usually that fuels creativity. I don't necessarily buy the idea that giving Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland
carte blanche, pretty much to like.
oh, you've got 70 episodes to do.
Right.
That doesn't make me feel secure as a person who would want to watch the show.
Right.
Because it doesn't really make it seem all that immediate that I should watch it. Like, if they're not coming out that fast, which I understand why, because it's animation, but like at least something like Venture Brothers, which I think is a superior show. I think you'd agree because I know you love that show.
I love Venture Brothers, yeah, but it's the. For as much as people complain about how long it takes for a new season of Rick and Morty, like they don't know anything. Like
No, right. It is tenuous at best. But you also know that the moment they announce a premiere date,
Right.
that what you are about to get into is a full and complete idea worked through, and is not going to be like only set up for another season or another episode. Which is I don't know. The whole 70 plus order just really annoyed the shit out of me when I heard about that.
Yeah, it's I'm still watching it just because
Do you think it makes it to all those episodes?
Do you think it's going to make it to all those episodes?
Well,
It's too early to say. I believe that there has to be some other sort of course corrections. Like I think that it might have the longevity to do that. I mean, hell. Again, I'm sort of comparing it to like Futurama in that sort of respect, because like I didn't think that Futurama was going to make it as many episodes as it did, and even in its like latter half of its like lifetime, post like renewal, post like Comedy Central. And
I was
shit
gonna
like,
say that had a switch channels that had fan petitions,
and it's still like when I think back to those later episodes, a lot of them are some of my favorite of the
most
entire
people say
series.
that it only got at least somewhat like better as it went on. And
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah.
But that's the opposite of what right now Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon have locked down, which is that's more like we'll just close the door on The Office, like give us 70 episodes, okay, and then just like closing the door and thinking that the children are actually going to do their homework. I don't know. That's just...
Yeah. I mean, I'm still looking forward to what has built up to be sort of like the one like consistent background development where you watch the first season, right?
Yeah.
And you haven't watched anything past like the middle of the second season, right?
Not that I remember.
Okay,
no.
so something happens in the third season where it reintroduces that character that we met.
Mr. Poopy Butthole?
Oh no, he was actually he is in the fourth. Yes, there is a character named Mr. Poopy Butthole. Yeah, that's this kind of show. But I actually like Mr. PB. So like
first episode him was or wait, has he? Well, he's been in multiple episodes.
Yeah, he was in the Well, actually, he was in the third episode, the episode that I didn't like, but I liked him. I just don't like the episode.
Anyway.
It's a really petty vendetta episode, if anything.
But what were you gonna say? In season 3,
In season 3, it finally pulls on a thread that was sort of like laid in season 1, but wasn't capitalized in season 2, and that is the aftermath of the Citadel of Ricks. And that one character who got away, who was actually the mastermind behind it all, he comes back in an episode called the Rick Lantis Mix-Up that I actually recommend that you watch, even if you haven't seen anything.
Okay.
Like you can.
So if I want to check back in,
If you want to just drop into that episode, like there's been some other stuff that's happened in the time since, but like that one episode, I think that you would really vibe with. And it sees the return of that character in a major way that I would love to see built on like in later things, because I think that's like we now have an actual antagonist in Rick and Morty that I feel like would be really interesting.
Interesting.
Also, on top of that, not trying to monopolize this, but I also I watched the recent episode of Watchmen.
Oh,
Yeah, which I am.
We just got through the 6th episode.
Yep.
In terms of live.
What was it? This extraordinary being.
This extraordinary being, yeah. And it was extraordinary.
So, because we're a movie podcast and not first and foremost a TV podcast, should we just say right now we're not going to talk about it for super long, but there are going to be spoilers for that episode for the next 5 minutes, or are we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I think we're good with that. So
we don't normally give spoiler warnings, but we don't also normally talk about.
And
do we want to talk about like what we're planning on doing after?
Yeah, we can tease that out.
Yeah, real quick though, I will say that we will have the timestamp of when the film review will start. So if you at this point do not want to hear anything about Watchmen, you can just scoot ahead
to it.
Yeah.
And before we even start that, the spoilers, I think we can all agree that this was a great episode of television.
Yeah,
so
it was.
Just give a preview in case you're not caught up and or you're on the fence about Watchmen.
Yeah.
We definitely all recommend it.
Yeah, I definitely recommend the episode.
As like we have in the past, as Toussaint was getting at a minute ago or so, we are planning on doing an episode on this season of television, especially since there are, at least at this point, no plans for another season. So if anything, this may continue on with somebody other than Damon Lindelof being the main driving force, but it mostly will probably be an anthology-type series if there is a continuation on. Yeah. So
absolutely,
Toussaint, please.
So, sort of to give like a brief overview of the show and of the significance of this one particular episode, because this is basically the 6th episode in a 9-episode run. So we are already well past the midway point, and now we are getting to a point where now all these pieces of a larger mystery are beginning to coalesce, and now we're entering into prime endgame phase with this particular storyline for Watchmen. So we basically learn the identity of who murdered a major character in the first episode. We know the relationship of a person to the main character, like how exactly they relate to them, and what their larger sort of significance within the history and the canon of Watchmen is, and how just their very existence sort of like reframes an entire legacy of like what spawned the entire phenomenon of mass superheroes in the world of this show, of even the comic too. So is there anybody else who wants to like bounce off ideas for this? Because like I wouldn't talk a little bit, but like
I will say, and if you're somebody out there who has not seen it and doesn't plan on seeing it, is just listening to this for fun.
I'm being oblique because I'm trying not to
Yeah. I guess I just want to give a little bit of context that the main theme of this season of television is racism.
Yeah, racism.
Is it acceptable?
And the very first
race. What is it?
The very first episode, the first 12 minutes or so, features a back in time review of what happens with one of the characters that we now know is on the show, and their, I just want to say, experience in the Tulsa race riots.
Yep.
And it's actually factual event, and a lot of the actions that happen are very much.
I think this is an alternate universe.
I think it's pretty much accurate.
Anyway,
Can you imagine though, like because the show is this crazy sci-fi and literally an alt universe and where time has diverged, if some I don't know, skinhead was like climate changing this shit and be like, well, I think maybe Lindelof just knows that it never really happened, and so he put it in this show where, I don't know, Robert Redford is president.
Man, they gotta twist themselves into a pretzel just to justify that sort of argument.
I feel like the show may tip its hand, if it hasn't already, that may be the point in time where we went off into this reality.
At least, if not,
at any rate,
if not that, one of the many diverging points, that
especially from what we see in this episode with the creation of
Hooded Justice. Yep, Hooded Justice is the first superhero in the sort of universe of Watchmen. He's not a superhero as in a comic in that universe, but rather the first person who actually dressed up in a costume and started beating the shit out of
criminals,
vagabonds, and ne'er-do-wells, and basically inspiring this whole sort of costume generational fad of people just dressing up in costumes and promoting themselves in that sort of way.
And I would say, before you continue, that it's important to note that Alan Moore in the comic did not reveal who was under the hood.
Yeah, he never actually revealed who Hooded Justice was. Hooded Justice makes an appearance via flashback in one of the issues. I think it's the second issue. And all other sort of supplementary information about Hooded Justice is conveyed through a memoir written by another character who they themselves did not know the entirety or the fullness of that story of what was going on.
It's
only
very
from there.
conjectured based.
Yeah.
Which actually bleeds into the show, because the episode prior to this episode had Red Scare and I think Panda literally trading theories about how, I think Dr. Manhattan's, that makes no sense.
Yeah.
He's like, well, he can time travel.
They're like, no, he can't. That's another thing I like about this show is nobody seems to be entirely certain of what Dr. Manhattan can or cannot do, and I feel like that's going to come back in a very real way, and I'm looking forward to that. But this particular episode is interesting for the fact that in the prior canon of materials that Nick just alluded to, Alan Moore's original Watchmen comic with Dave Gibbons, Hooded Justice's race was never really put into question. It was always he was a white guy. We don't know which white guy he is, but he might be this white guy, even though this white guy died.
Which it also isn't in this universe for everyone in the real world.
Right.
Real world.
Right. He it turns out that Hooded Justice is actually a black man named Will Reeves, who is the grandfather of Angela Abar, who is the main character, the protagonist of this season of Watchmen, who goes by the sort of vigilante nom de guerre Sister Knight. Basically works for the Tulsa PD. And basically it goes through his entire life of through the early 1940s, right before World War II, where he began to dress up as Hooded Justice. Why did he choose, quote, quote, choose that particular outfit, if he did choose it at all? The Minutemen, the first generation of superheroes who would then give way to the second generation, who are the main characters of the original Watchmen comic, and basically sort of seeing how is the archetype of superhero-dom complicated by the presence or the acknowledgement of race in that regard. And why is it so? Because a lot of people who I've kept my ear to the pavement, so to speak, in listening to both people who like this episode and don't like this episode, who like the show and don't like the show, just so that I'm clear as to what exactly is the actual discourse going on here right now. And one of the contentions is that Hooded Justice couldn't be black because we see his face in one panel and it's clearly white, and they actually don't see his face. You only see the outline of his eyes, and the show actually beautifully, almost chillingly gives an answer as to why he looks the way that he does versus in that panel of the comic.
Which should, when it happens, should be taken as like a fucking dumbfounded twist that anybody, white, male, whatever, should watch and completely take for granted that this is how it is, because we accept that exact opposite with every white character who puts on the mask, and how Batman can't be identified because he does the same shit over his eyes. So the idea that like this would be a bridge too far because you can't, like, no, we you know,
we do that same thing with like our other favorite vigilantes. Like, how come it doesn't work with this guy? We could just tell, we could just tell by the shape of his skull. I was like, holy shit!
I mean,
I know, right? Yeah.
At that point, that gets into a whole different argument, because now you're getting into Black Klansman territory too. Of I just know what those blacks sound like.
I know. I know that there is
Are you sure?
there's a contention of whether or not this nullifies anything that was said in the original text, and I don't think it does. If anything, I think that it necessarily complicates it and then complements it in such a way that it feels like it's two sides of the same coin as to what was the intention of the creation of that character in the original comic. Whereas, like, I've gone back and read those passages before, and not knowing what I know from the show, like just siloing off what happens in the comic versus what happens in the show, and then taking them together as a common universe. Like, I feel like you could totally read that in a totally different way, and introducing these elements then sort of like brings it in another direction. But I feel like the reason why Hooded Justice existed in Alan Moore's original comic the way that it did was meant to interrogate why, like, whose fantasy is this? Whose fantasy are superheroes, the earliest superheroes, sort of afforded to, and who is sort of like brushed aside and like left to figure out whatever the hell they're going to do, right? And then to have this new element like introduced further complicates that, and if anything repronounces that same sort of question in a way that feels very uncomfortable, and I feel necessarily uncomfortable as to why is it so patently unbelievable that this person could be the first superhero, because we understand that with the presence of race, that person would not be held in the same regard as they would be
who stands to benefit the most from anonymity.
Who stands exactly.
The marginalized.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean,
that's just pretty much.
Yeah. And even complicates the idea of like masks are used to like sort of like conceal trauma, but also to sort of explore alternate identities and other sort of like repressed like personal things about a person that they otherwise would not be able to explore. And I think that episode also totally like clues into all those ideas. It's a very well done piece of television, and I am just constantly taken aback by this show, like how much I like it and how much it works for me on that level, because I feel like there are a lot of Watchmen fans who disagree with the show and its interpretation on the fact of it not being a verbatim adaptation. But even if it was a verbatim adaptation, they would hate it anyway because it wouldn't be the comic. And really, for me, whether or not something is exactly like the source is not the point, but rather, okay, you've changed this one element. How then does that change the entire text, and how do we do we just like gloss over that, or are we actually going to explore that and actually like have a conversation about that? I'm thinking about Ghost in the Shell again. Honestly, it's like it's the plug and play shit like that pisses me off, because it's evidence of a entire lack of self-awareness and an entire lack of regard for the actual text and understanding why people like that text, and then actually like prodding and involving the audience to actually like negotiate and talk about it.
Well, you also have to.
This show does it right.
I was just going to say, you also look at the purpose
right.
of the change that you made.
Right.
Casting a white person in Ghost in the Shell was done to try to get white audiences to come watch your film.
And then there's all the naked ways that it was sort of retrofitted in order to sort of like retroactively justify that that decision, and then to then involve it in such a way that is one of the most grotesque and honestly culturally offensive things I've ever seen in a sci-fi movie of its ilk. It's like, wow, you thought you were being edgy. You actually totally shot yourself in the foot. But no, Watchmen is incredible.
I mean, just the last 2 episodes specifically, because I like the whole series so far. The only episode that I thought was not amazing was episode 4.
Episode 3 was kind of my thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I get why people like it.
Space junk episode.
Yeah, that's the space junk episode. It's just like, I will say this. I like that episode. It is sort of my least favorite of the ones that we've seen so far, just because, and this is coming from me having like read the comic multiple times, a lot of the references to the original comic are they're way too on the nose for me.
Yeah.
Some lines of dialogue are like, did you really just fucking say that?
I think what's funny about the series right now is that
it's at its best when it's like riffing off of and diverging and sort of going in different directions from the text and sort of like evoking it in broad strokes where they're just like versus just like directly quoting. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. But I think the reason why they're doing that, and not to say that this is what they should be doing, but I think what you're noticing for me is that I think this show, a telling sign is that when this Hooded Justice episode came up, at least in my opinion, the divergence there as to who's under that hood works out so beautifully, and in my opinion, canonically makes perfect sense, and it enriches the text that it's in, and also enriches the text that came before.
Yeah.
Not because that text couldn't reach that, it's just that text is caught in time because it was written, published, and then it stayed there as far as not the popularity, but it's not like Alan Moore has made sequels or anything like that.
There's one element that, not to cut you off.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
There's one element that people disagree and think that, it doesn't make sense for Will Reeves to be Hooded Justice, because I think it was one of the interstitial chapters of Hollis's his memoir where it was talking about how Hooded Justice like sort of expressed like implicit support for Nazi Germany and shit like that. And I think that like, how do you negotiate that with Will Reeves' identity? And I feel like it's actually in the show that it sort of like harkens at that, because you have the beginning of the second episode where you have Will Reeves who is holding on to this document that was in the jacket of his father. That is the last thing that he has of his father. I
mean, he basically gives him his little Paddington piece of paper to say, watch after this boy.
Watch after this boy, because it was the only piece of paper that he had after him, like for that. And that pamphlet is an actual pamphlet that was printed during World War I. That had
propaganda.
That was propaganda, but it wasn't. But it was propaganda that was purposely weaponizing like the institutional prejudices of America, then to then demoralize like colored like fighters.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with that document.
There's a lot going on, and I feel like there's a lot that's going on for that character to be exposed to that at such an impressionable age, to have still be carrying that into their old age, and to still sort of be internalizing those ideas and those sentiments, and maybe even the sort of like the implicit hope that is underlying them, even if it is a false hope.
Oh yeah,
and it's
the Martha's pearl necklace of black pain.
Yes, Nick. Yes.
Why would you say that name?
To me, it's the kind of question that parallels to one of the most uncomfortable questions in the original Watchmen, which is, why would Laura Pesci conceive a child with a man that she had every reason to hate? They're not the same question, but I think that they sort of the arc of what you would have to interrogate in order to sort of like get at an answer, if any answer to that, sort of falls in the same sort of milieu of what they're both getting at is that the answer will never be sufficient enough to be an answer. The answer in and of itself is that people are complicated and you don't know the fullness of somebody's lived experience. So I like that.
Yeah.
So we'll get into it more when we do our full episode on this, but one thing I will mention that I believe will be coming back at some point later on in this season of television is the idea of using the mesmerizing machine in some way.
Oh, that's going to be a huge thing.
Yeah. So anyways, I'm assuming that the actual actions that happened in the theater were very much like what happens in the Kingsman film where no, I'm being dead serious.
No, I mean,
just this idea of people just beating the shit out.
It is like that. Yeah.
pretty
Oh,
much.
wait a minute.
Yeah.
I was thinking of different movie.
Oh,
For
okay.
some stupid reason, I was thinking of The King's Speech, and all I could think of was like Jeffrey Rush's hypnosis when he's trying to like, get him to like
Stop stammering.
Yeah, and it was so weird because that was just related enough where I wasn't gonna be like, are you sure about that? But like, it made me laugh because I had no idea how that was gonna. Anyway, The Kingsman. Yes, that makes a lot more sense. Where there's actual brainwashing technology being used.
But obviously, before he burns the whole warehouse down after killing Papa Trump,
Yeah.
Oh, that's a fun article.
That was.
It's a fun theory.
Yeah, it seems like it might.
I think it's pretty solid. I think, yeah. All the evidence seems to be pointing there.
Will then saves this technology to possibly use against somebody at some point, but obviously we literally see.
I was
going to
say we know for a fact that even if it doesn't show up ever again, which I definitely think it will, like at least there's a closed loop there of like we got our answer. That's at least the answer to the riddle that was basically posed in the first episode, which is how did Judd die
by his own hand,
right? So.
But obviously being brainwashed. Yeah. But there's that ending scene here is so good. Mostly because he's got his little flashlight that apparently he can just point at him, and that which is
he's had a lot of time to work on that stuff.
Okay,
that was the only shot where, and I thought it was actually funny, and I didn't want it to be different. But at one point he's just like barely aiming it, and he's just kind of like holding it backwards, above and over his head.
I was gonna say
Have you ever tried to shoot a basketball backwards? Like
I was gonna say, also Judd is also climbing up the tree and clearly facing the other direction. So does it not matter if he's not looking? It's fine. It's all good.
It's just funny.
Yeah. Anyways, right before that, though, when they're having an actual discussion and he's talking about his KKK robe that his grandfather had that he's kept. Oh boy, is that just a little. Oh,
that's
because.
Oh yeah, I see you. I see exactly who you are.
Yeah,
but the whole thing
I
is
think
that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
No, I was going to say that I'm with you, Alex, and that seems great because I really do think that does kind of exemplify a lot of what's happening in 2019, which is that in 2019, soon to be 2020, we are certainly seeing a whole sort of people be just actual Nazis and KKK, members and people, but we are also seeing the large majority of maybe, shall we say, a certain generation and a certain perspective, basically unable to distance themselves from something like that, even if they're not as militant in their prejudices, so to speak. I mean,
or even if they do not believe themselves to be a racist.
Yeah, but we know that he worked with Sister Night, and I actually do think, kind of like as to your question when you said earlier about how you try to interrogate those threads of like, why would Lori have a child and with the comedian and things like that, whereas I think Judd is the same kind of thing, whereas like, how can he, I think, actually have a genuine relationship with somebody like Sister Night, both with and without a mask, but also still before about to hang himself, forced to hang himself, still be so pettily tied up and say like, well, that's my legacy. Like, well, why are you put it in the closet then? And it's like, and I think that's the thing is that
you don't know.
It can't be extracted even from the recesses of some of these people's mind. That it's like they don't even like. It's almost compulsion. Like they don't know what else to do if they can't hold on to something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah,
very fascinating. Very
great.
well done.
It's a very good show. It's really I think, heated up in the last 2 episodes. And with only 3 episodes left, I'm pretty much on the edge of my seat every time it's going to be on. So I'm with you, Tucson. I'm liking it, and I'm glad it's good because
I'm really glad it's good.
Yeah, because I know you were concerned.
I was vehemently against the idea of it because I had an impression of what it was going to be. Like it was going to be another adaptation of the direct text itself, like another like Zack Snyder's Watchmen. Only now this time it's Damon Lindelof for some reason doing the exact same thing that Zack Snyder did. I'm just like, why the fuck are you doing this? And now, like, seeing what he's actually done with it, it's a lot more bold. It's a lot more interesting. It's a lot more...
more appearances by Lube Man?
Yeah, more...
Lube Man.
Yeah, I think that's Petey. I'm going to put that out there. That's Petey.
And I hope Pennywise wasn't in that drain.
Yeah.
Like the guy for
I think
who went with Lori, or
yes,
not Lori.
Yeah.
Wait, yeah, Lori.
I think that's Petey. Yeah.
Maybe.
Petey seems to be the only other person who actually knows the true identity of, like, Sister Night.
Well, it is interesting that I do think that there must be a payoff to his, like, Wikipedia, like, knowledge, whereas you don't get that fascinated by these people without wanting to be them, I think.
Right.
So actually, I think you're onto something there.
Yeah? That's crazy. But, yeah, this has actually been a really rewarding watch. It's actually it's gone from a show that I was so skeptical about to being my favorite show of the entire season, in that I watch every single episode after it goes up. Like I've got HBO on Amazon Prime. I just watch it the morning after, and just like that's the first thing I do. I just watch Watchmen.
Yeah.
So.
Damon Lindelof's on a roll because that 3rd season of The Leftovers was absolutely fantastic.
I'm taking it on a provisional basis, like season by season. Like, okay, let's see what we're doing, buddy. Have we learned the difference between like mystery and convolution? Like, okay, let's do that.
We're all gonna,
I will say,
it always goes back to Prometheus.
Oh, it does. It's really going to go there.
But I think The Leftovers is a great example, though, that if for some reason he announced that he wanted to do a 2nd season, I would actually not be skeptical of that at all. Like, he learned everything he could from each season of The Leftovers, where that show got better every season. And I'm not saying if this show was on for 3 seasons and he did all 3, that would guarantee that it's, this is going to be better than that. But he does not really move forward without making sure that he has a vision moving forward. So
not to prolong this, but this world is a dystopia, right? Can we agree that this world is a dystopia?
I would call it that.
And that, like, the background for it is that Vietnam was...
Oh, wait. Do you mean the world of Watchmen? I thought you were talking about our reality.
Shut the fuck up. Anyway. No. So, Vietnam was won, and we're in Bernstein. We're assassinated, which means that the Watergate conspiracy never came to light. So that Richard Nixon was then able to campaign for re-election and campaigned successfully for the repeal of the 22nd Amendment, which got rid of term limits, which means that he was able to, I can't remember when he became president, but basically he was able to become president like all the way up to like
his death,
like around like 1988 or 1990, around that time. And then
Adrian Veidt handpicks Robert Redford to be the next president.
Ford becomes like the interim president, like he does in real life, but then Redford becomes the next president, and then he's president for 30 years, and there's sort of like the blue wave that sort of like follows in that regard. But what is so dystopian about this is that our reality, such as it is subject to the sort of convulsive like vacillations between sort of like faux optimism and faux sort of like democratic regard and this sort of like almost nightmare self-flagellation, like austerity. The vacillations in this universe are arguably going to be even worse for the fact that like if after 30 years and Redford decides to not become president anymore, and then you elect somebody else who is conservative, they also do not have those same sort of like guard posts to keep them from being in office. So they'll be in office for like the rest of their lives, and it's going to be fucking nightmare. Like I would not want to live in this universe. Even like without the whole fucking squid thing or whatever shit like that. Like this sounds like an even more nightmarish version of our world. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, good stuff. Looking forward to our full episode on that, probably coming out sometime in January.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have way more to talk about. That.
Oh yeah. So tonight, a very exciting time for me, as I've been patiently waiting a long time for this.
Like a good little boy.
Yeah. Thank you. Very much excited for Martin Scorsese's The Irishman. And I will say I pretty much wanted him to go back to his gangster roots with the old crew, and that's been something I've been hoping for, and one of those things where life just doesn't work that way. And yet, here we are in 2019, and we literally get a film with Martin Scorsese doing a gangster show with De Niro, Joe Pesci, and also Al Pacino this time.
I was going to say, he brought the old crew and basically folded in the only other person who would have been like a good match back then, so.
And this is,
It's weird that he hasn't been in a Scorsese film
before this.
before, yeah.
And this is the second time since Godfather Part 2 that De Niro and Pacino... the third time since Godfather Part 2. We have Heat, which is an all-time classic. I'll debate that with anybody.
Oh, yeah.
We have the terrible film Righteous Kill from like 2008, 2009, where they are just thrown in together. It was a director, whoever put that out, just said, oh, I've got these two. I win. And it's not good.
You don't.
And now you have De Niro and Pacino
It's almost a
together
good
again.
course correction because
Well,
you have Godfather Part 2 where they're in the same movie but they can never be in the same scene. Then you have, Heat, where they're in the same movie but they only get to be in the same scene once. And then some rando gets him, but at least Scorsese was like, nope, if we're going to end...
Yeah.
If one of them is going to die, we're going to get this in there quick.
I mean, I will say...
Around that era, was that also when, like, Al Pacino was doing that...
Like 88 minutes?
That Dunkin' Donuts commercial where he was like, get a load of my chocolate blend.
I don't remember.
You remember that?
I don't remember
You
that.
don't remember that?
No,
I was thinking about that shit all the time when we were watching The Irishman.
Well, I think that says a lot about you.
Well, we'll watch that after we're done with this episode.
Maybe.
Yeah, we will.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
At any rate, Casino, as anyone who's listened to multiple episodes of this podcast probably know, is my favorite film of all time, and it really doesn't have that much competition for number one. I also absolutely love Goodfellas and also Wolf of Wall Street as well, even though that's less a straight gangster film.
Oh, that's a gangster film.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
that's what gangsters look like.
White-collar gangsters.
It is.
White-collar private
in
equity
terms
gangsters.
of
But I know what you mean.
what Scorsese does with
Mafiosa.
Yes. This is more...
Mafiosa. Not
Mafiosa.
Mafiosa.
I like that you knew that joke.
So anyways, The Irishman, which is 3.5 hours, surrounds a mob hitman who recalls his possible involvement with the slaying of Jimmy Hoffa. So the film stars, as mentioned, De Niro, Pacino, and Joe Pesci, but also has smaller performances from Harvey Keitel, Ray Romano, Bobby Cannavale, Anna Paquin, Stephen Graham, Jack Houston, Jesse Plemons, and there was somebody else here that I wanted to mention. Oh, yeah, Jim Norton, who randomly shows up as Don Rickles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Action Bronson, too. He's a rapper. He's the one who was selling him the coffins. That's why I was freaking out when he came on screen. The guy with the big bushy beard. I'm like, what the hell is this guy doing here? That's crazy.
I got 100 black coffins. I know that's not the
Different
same
guy.
rapper,
Different
but
guy,
it was wrapped in coffins.
I know, yeah.
So
I'm not racist.
Before we get into opening remarks, which I believe I will lead on this film, before we do that,
Yes.
a couple of things I wanted to mention. The first being that I basically created the viewing of this film between myself and these other two gentlemen and my wife, Emily, on the day that this film came out, which was the day before Thanksgiving, 2019. And it was one of the most wonderful film viewing experiences I've had in a long time.
I feel the same way. It was so much fun.
We didn't Neon Demon it?
Oh boy.
Oh,
That was a joke.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Oh God.
But I will say, and this is getting into real dangerous territory, because I am a major fan of theater viewing of films. But at the same time, the night before Thanksgiving, getting to get together, I'll have pizza.
The
kind of chat it up.
circumstances are really at a beautiful cross section of, of that being just the perfect way to do it at that moment.
Yeah. But at the same time, I absolutely loved it, and I would have loved to see this in the theater as well, but just the way that it worked out and the fact that we could all just hang out, and when somebody's really giggling about something or thinks something interesting, we could pause it, or if somebody wants to take a bathroom break, as this is a very long film. It's easy
we
to do
had
that.
like very random tangents, which we might get brought up, but like one time I was very randomly kind of derailed our viewing because I was thinking about presidential assassinations and how,
I remember that.
and how there have been 4 successful ones, but we only remember 2 of them, and because that or at least the Kennedy assassination comes
Or there was the other time that Toussaint literally fell on his ass. I mean,
I thought
all the way.
I thought if I didn't say anything, you would have forgotten
literally,
about it.
that's been in the front of my mind since we started recording, and I was going to wait to deploy it at any moment, so now I don't have to do that.
Yeah, it just was so.
Our spirits were high that night.
So.
And yet I was the only one drinking, so that can't be your excuse, Toussaint.
And Toussaint I don't know if he slipped on a blanket or he just...
I didn't slip
it was
on a
just
blanket.
the hardwood floor,
I
because
didn't-
it was nice and clean,
it was
because
just like-
your house is always beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you, Emily. We'll
It was,
appreciate
it was
that.
It was kind of a slippery floor, and I was wearing my socks.
But here's the
And
thing.
I was trying to turn a
So-
corner too fast, and then I
so-
ended up landing on my side. I'm like,
sure
well,
did.
this is happening.
When,
And then you pretty woman us.
when functioning adults fall, usually...
It's always funny.
Well, it is, but usually it involves 2 steps. It involves falling down to your knees or something. And
There's
then,
a change in the
rest.
altitude.
Yeah. Where Toussaint somehow found a way to go exactly horizontal and fall all the way down, and it made just the loudest noise.
The moment he lost his center of gravity, he just, like a rookie showing up to boot camp on his first day, just hit the deck. And good thing you said something.
Yeah, I was
when you
fine.
were like, I'm fine. Because before you said that, I could have seen, like, is there going to be a pool of blood down there?
No,
like, did he hit his head?
I'm fine.
No,
No, I mean, like, the moment you said that, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, you just
Yeah.
went straight down. But
No,
boy.
I mean, I was legitimately concerned that you broke something because it
No.
made a very loud
It was
noise.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so we
were very happy.
Oh yes,
that's why we're
My
making fun of
side
it.
was sore, but like I was like,
I would.
yeah.
That's your body helping you.
yeah, I'm just like, I'm here. It's like I don't. I was just trying to run from my mind. It's like, how the fuck did that happen? I was just like,
No, it was pretty delightful, but it was very.
You made our evening better.
that's good.
I would agree, especially since you didn't die.
Yeah.
I thought overall
That would
it
have
was
sucked. We would have had to. I mean, can you imagine trying to pause the Irishman because somebody died, and then it's like, okay, you still have like 2.5 hours to go. The next time you're gonna sit down and watch it.
Now
But-
every time you sit down and do it, you think about that.
yeah, I
and
know.
you're like,
It's just like, God, could this movie be any longer, emotionally speaking?
oh, wow. yeah,
that's good.
luckily I did not die. So
yeah,
there we
it's
go.
still here, as you can probably hear. Yep. So, anyways, I
Also,
loved
luckily,
it.
none of the cats were right there.
That is
Oh my
true.
god!
You would've murdered a
yeah.
cat.
Oh my god! I would feel. Oh, I'd be so. Oh my god!
I only make a joke because there was no cats in the vicinity.
Well, I definitely think that they're really cats just in general. I'm sure they would have been able to get out of there before you fell. But at the same
He
time,
would have gave them a run for their
oh
money.
yeah, they would have. Well, and they would have scampered off. Mm-hmm. So it's all good. I'll fight. I'll fight.
I'm
And-
fine.
Yes, and that is the most important thing.
Yeah. The cats are fine too. That's
Oh,
what's
that
more
was
important.
That's also important. And then third best is just now it's a hilarious story that we can all go back on. Anyways, though, it was a wonderful evening, and I thank you guys both very much for coming over and watching the film with us the day before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And it's always how I'm going to remember watching this film. So
Me too.
I appreciate that.
Had a wonderful time over there, and I agree with you that while I'm always going to be like a film theater snob or whatever. There is something to be said when you can make it an intimate affair between only people you like, because you will never have that at the theater. That definitely adds a nice twinge of camaraderie.
I also advocate for, the primacy of theaters as being like the main like movie-going like venue that I want to experience that, because I like going to the theaters. I like being able to share the communal experience of like watching a well-made film with like other people, whether they be perfect strangers or good friends that were able to like just like laugh a little bit in the middle of it. But as of recently, there's been a couple of really fucked up theater experiences that have just
Speaking of which,
oh boy,
oh my goodness,
not to derail this anymore.
Oh boy,
but we kind of have to, because it's become a trend.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to tell, Alex has already heard the story, but I have to really quickly tell my latest "Who's That Sitting in My Seat" ticket story. As you know, dear listener, I am a staunch hater of people who go to the movies, buy reserved seats, and do not sit in the correct seats. Obviously, there are times when people make mistakes, but I genuinely believe that is like 5% of all situations when this occurs. And I shoot me if I'm wrong, but I think it is 95% people being assholes and people not caring and people, whatever. And it shouldn't matter in the long run because, we all have a seat, but it does matter because other people end up paying the price of social awkwardness and just plain rudeness that they didn't plan on if they, kowtow towards you because you're being an asshole or whatever. So, my latest story, though, topped all my previous stories of just like how far out of orbit the decision to not sit in your own seat can reach. So I went with my parents to go see Mr. Rogers, the new movie.
Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Yep, and actually, not bad. I get into the theater with them, and about 5 minutes till showtime, this is Sunday, the week before Thanksgiving, and that was the opening weekend. That movie's going to be packed.
Oh, yeah.
That is,
absolutely
made for Thanksgiving week, let alone a Sunday afternoon showing. So we get to our seats, people are coming in, it definitely looks like it's going to be a full theater, it's not quite there yet. So we get into our row, and I see two elderly ladies, and they are sitting, and I count out our seats, and our very last seat, one of the two elderly ladies was sitting in. So my guess was that they were one seat over. That was my assumption. So we had just had a long talk on the Parasite episode, because Dan had a bad experience, and we had talked about our other previous bad experience.
It's just the time of the year where people decide to just go buck wild.
It's every time.
Oh, it's every time. It's every time. And here's the thing. I actually did a little reflecting after that episode, because I was like, maybe I am being too black and white and just, militant about this. Because I even put out another story, which I told on that episode, to Twitter and said, am I the asshole? And people said I was, simply because I wanted the seats that I purchased, but because I should have got up so that other people could sit with their other people. Whatever. You can listen to that story on Parasite. But I'm like, if that makes me the asshole, then maybe I need to reflect But part of me still thought I wasn't. Part of me still does. So this comes along, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to really try hard here and go out of my way to practice what other people
were not rewarded for that.
Are preaching to me. Nope. So I sit down next to that to the one lady. I told my parents, I'm like, we're here. I'm like, and I whispered to my mom, I'm like, that lady's in our seat on this side. So we have these two. We don't have that one. Hopefully no one comes. Then I turned around to that lady and her friend, and I said, just so you know, I think you guys are one seat down, so I'm totally fine with sitting here, but if someone does come in and has this seat over here, we probably are going to have to get up and move. It's totally... And then the lady I was talking to turns around and goes, nope, we're in the right seat. So I said, oh.
All right, bitch.
Well,
okay.
Then that was like... Okay, this is, I don't believe in you, God, but this is your test. So I turned, and I had my phone out. It's not like I even had to dig and, pull it up, and I kind of just turned it and just said, oh, well, it says we have 3, 4, and 5, so that's weird that we would be wrong. And then she goes, and then she pulled out her ticket, doesn't show it to me whatsoever, and says, yeah, well, we have 4 and 5. Like, well, first of all, that makes no sense because this is 4 over here and you're not in 4, you're in 5 and 6, whatever. Yeah. But I'm like, second of all, you're not actually showing me your ticket, so I don't really buy it. Third of all, I didn't say you had to move. I just said, just so you know, this has the potential to screw everything up, but I'm letting you have this. But I was like, okay, but and then she goes, they must have oversold. And I'm like, well, they don't really do that anymore because it's no longer humans. Like it's the ticketing system where you can only buy the seats or whatever. And she's like, oh, well, then, you know what? I bet you're in the wrong theater. I'm like, I'm in the wrong theater for the movie that I'm going to see at this showtime or whatever.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, man? More people kept coming in. And because she was so insistent that I was in the wrong seat, I said, you know what? I am so sorry. I said, I'm going to go get the manager. No, I said, I'm going to go talk to the manager to see if I can get moved to another seat because I feel so bad that I would be in somebody else's seat. So me and my mom... did a little action waddle all the way over with our indignance. Went over to the manager and we're like, hey, this old lady's in our seat, and if you truly did somehow oversold, which I doubt, but she claims it's possible, then you can put us in any seat. We just don't want to be in somebody else's seat, so can you put us in 3 seats together that's not already taken? And then she's like, can I see your tickets? And I said, yep. And she goes, okay, let's go talk to her. So they go in there, and the manager goes up to the lady and goes, hey, ma'am. She goes, these people bought these 3 seats. Can I see your tickets to make sure we didn't do it? And then she goes, no, we're in the right seats. And she's like, no, okay, and if that's true, we can figure that out. But can I see your ticket to make sure that? And then she starts rooting through her pockets again. She takes out, before she hands it to him, she goes, this was the 3:50 showing that we were going to see. She goes, well, we came to the 2:05 showing, and we bought tickets for that, but when we got here, it had already started, so we decided to go to this one instead. And then the manager was like, okay, well, that's not how movie tickets work. When you buy tickets to a showtime, you actually have to go see the correct one. Well, you guys started the movie early. When we got here, it was already started. Well, they're on an automatic system. They can't start early. They could start late somehow, but they literally can't start earlier than scheduled.
Ain't that a bitch? Ain't that a vicious person to just say, is like, oh, maybe you came to the wrong showtime. Well, actually, we came for the other showtime. I'm just are you projecting?
Isn't it funny when the story changes, though?
Yeah.
That's
okay,
great.
and I know this is long-winded, but there's a whole full circle irony to all of this.
There are to all of your stories,
far,
Nick.
Yeah. So she's like, okay.
You live a charmed life.
So she's like, all right, well, ma'am, she goes, you do have to get up because you don't have these seats and other people do. And then she pointed to us 3, and she's like, well, give them other seats. And then the manager, who completely handled this professionally without trying to be condescending to her or anything like that, was like, well, they've already purchased these seats, so they get these seats. She goes, I can, for free, go exchange your 2 tickets for 2 tickets in here, but I have to go see which seats are available, and then I will come back. And she's like, well, make them move. And she's like, nope, I just said, well, I can't do that. So they got up. Me and my mom practically high-fived each other with our eyes, and then sat down in our seats. So the irony of all this is that the manager leaves, goes out to get, the 2 seats, whatever, comes back in, and those 2 ladies went down 1 row and found 2 seats on the very end. So I see the manager come up to them, clearly say, these 2 seats are bought, like you can't sit here, but the 2 seats that are open are 1 row back up, which means they now are sitting on the very left of us instead of the very right, which, if you haven't caught on, means that when I sat next to this lady and I said, hey, just so you know, if the people that own these seats come and ask us to move, we're going to have to move, and she was insistent that somehow we had done all this wrong shit. If she had just said, oh, okay, and kept to her stupid lie, no one would have had to move. Yeah. Because nobody bought those seats, which means no one would have came and asked us to move. So because she, for some reason, felt compelled to somehow tell me I was wrong when she was not even in the right showtime, not even whatever, it just boggles my mind that some people are so stupid that they are their own worst enemy at that point.
And now Nick is...
And now I'm back.
I was going to say...
I'm back.
He's back.
If you're in the wrong seat, I don't care what it takes.
I'm going to need you to move.
Oh, yeah. Like, all right. And now, you know what? I think the manager is my best friend now. So I will do everything in my power to make sure that you sit in the right seat. Because if you don't, we're going to have a problem.
Very good. So The Irishman. I will start us off here.
Please.
I was so excited for this film when production was announced for this. It was pretty quick, I think, after Silence was in the theater that it was announced that this was going to be a thing. But just like with any property out there, until it's actually on film, on digital, whatever, and actually released, especially in this day and age, I'm always got to hold myself back of being too excited because you never know what's going to happen. But as production went through and this film eventually, even though it was pretty much a year later than thought it was going to be because of the de-aging techniques, I was been holding back my excitement. And then earlier this year, we had the release of the early promotional materials, which left something to be desired. And I was a little nervous, but as the promotional schedule went on, I felt like the trailers got better and better, and I was more excited. And then the early reviews came in, and they were just glowing for this. And that's when I really started to get excited for this film. And again, as I mentioned, it was a little while ago in the episode now, but I mean, Scorsese gangster films are my favorite films for the most part. And I like other movies too. I love Marvel movies and I like Star
Don't tell
Wars.
him that.
Well, that's true. But like when Scorsese's in his element telling gangster stories, it's some of the best work for my money when it comes to actual thematic experiences. So,
but how does it compare to Avengers Endgame?
Yeah, it's actually funny because they are the top 2 films on my rankings for the year so far.
Oh, who's on the top?
We'll probably find out by the end of the episode.
Probably. So at any rate, I tipped my hand a little bit there, but I was still super excited for this. And even though there was a time when I was a little nervous about how this was going to come out.
Oh, you thought it was going to be dog shit.
Pre-movie jitters.
I would think so. But at the same time, much like with Tarantino, I trust Martin Scorsese that he is going to put out a quality product. And I believe he delivered here, as I think The Irishman is just fantastic. I will say I've already put this into my Scorsese rankings, and it is not in my top 3. Even so,
I mean, that's a lofty accolade.
Again, my top 3 are in.
Well, and for your interest and whatnot.
Yeah. My top 3 of his are in my top 15 all-time films.
Right.
So it's high praise for myself to even say it's up as high as it is. But I think this film is absolutely fantastic, and I definitely will at some time pretty soon be viewing it again in its entirety, as I am not willing to give it a perfect rating as of yet, and I will get into that more later when we do ratings. But that being said, I think it is just on the outside looking in for being a perfect film. But there are always going to be some things I'm a little about. But even when I went back to rewatch some scenes a second time, there were some things that I was a little not so crazy about the first time that worked for me even better watching them. So I'll need to watch the whole film start to finish again here soon. Just the idea of these performers, most of which, and I'm talking about the 3 main ones, De Niro, Pacino, and Joe Pesci, most of which have become shells of themselves in their later career, where they have become willing. And Joe Pesci is a little bit exempt from this because he's been retired, but before he was doing some real shit. I mean, I'm talking about like 8 Heads in a Duffel Bag, Gone Fishing. He even came back and did that really weird Love Ranch movie 10 years ago.
Hard living, man. Hard living, hard dying.
But he was doing a lot of crap late in his career.
Yeah.
We know very much about De Niro and Pacino, some of the shit they've put out over the years, where they're willing to just do whatever just to get a paycheck.
I think with Pesci, it was that more most people refused to take him seriously if he wasn't a gangster, whereas Robert De Niro still had a bright spot every once in a while. Same thing with Al Pacino-ish. But, like, Joe Pesci, unfortunately, I think, I don't know, I say this as one myself, but if it's the small man syndrome or something, but he has this certain look that people were not willing to take seriously outside of that one archetype.
Which I will say, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I think that leads to a very interesting performance by him in this particular film.
Yes.
So
it kind of proves those people wrong.
Yep. So I will say, just overall, I think this is a absolutely fantastic film. Start to finish, there's really something scene to scene for me to chew on at almost every turn. And I do think that this film never gets higher than it does in its first, I don't know, about hour or so. I think the first third of this film is by far the best, at least the first time through. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are so many little moments and nuances throughout this film that are just wonderful, and is the story that it is wanting to tell about a lot of regret when you are older, and also a lot of betrayal that you do throughout your life, and also too the idea of being almost, I don't want to say owned by somebody, but being so
indebted to somebody.
Indebted to somebody.
Then you are making decisions that are contrary to what is in your heart.
Yeah. What's the difference between loyalty and slavery?
Loyalty
Trick
is...
question. One's illegal.
Wow, I was going to actually have something more philosophical to say, but thank you for being so pedantic.
But the interesting part about...
I want to return to that point in my own term, but okay, great.
That's like the hardest I've laughed at one of my own jokes in a long time.
Yeah.
The interesting thing...
You have a couple of them.
About Frank Sheeran and his relationship with both Jimmy Hoffa and Russell Bufalino is that I don't necessarily know if any of those three are good people, and I don't think the film really paints them in a light that they are good people at all.
But they're main characters, so they must be good people. So the film must be telling us that we should be like those people,
Obviously.
which is like a grade schooler's level of media analysis.
Yeah. Obviously, this film is not telling you that any of these are good people.
But that's what Twitter says.
Okay. So, clearly, Scorsese is showing that all these people are shit, in my opinion at least. And there's different levels for sure, but the subsets of shit and then the also relationships that happen throughout the entirety of the lives of these people as they interweave together, and the other people who come and go throughout their lives and their families and their other friends, I thought almost was just fascinating from start to finish. And the fact that it can actually be with De Niro and Joe Pesci and Al Pacino is just, just one of those things we're looking back on. Like, this is such a great moment in cinematic history, in my opinion, only because this is really probably the end of the line for getting a great Martin Scorsese gangster film. And the fact that he was able to do it with those three actors, as who knows how long any of those four will be living.
Harvey Keitel was in there too. So.
Yeah, but the three
he wasn't.
He wasn't
to a lesser extent, but he was there. I know, right.
These people will all be moving on, whether it be
to the grave,
to the graveyard.
Yeah.
Whether it be dying, or it be retiring from acting, or whether it be just being not as involved. It's the same thing with Martin Scorsese. Who knows how long he has left?
Right.
I mean, so the fact that I really wanted to see one more great gangster film from him, and the fact that he was able to deliver it with the two main characters from my two favorite Scorsese gangster films, one of those cinematic things that I will probably never be able to not gush over.
Right.
This was wonderful. The acting performance in this film are so high level, in my opinion. I do think De Niro is actually quite good, even though I think he might be the worst out of the main three. But I do think he's pretty solid. Al Pacino and Joe Pesci are both absolutely fantastic in this film. And I actually thought that the aging didn't really look that bad on either of them. I actually thought Al Pacino looked pretty good throughout the entirety of the film.
You did say something about like their eyes, which as soon as you said that, I noticed it.
Especially Robert De Niro's.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know he was wearing blue contacts, I think, to look more like Frank Sheeran. But even so, just the CGI... First of all, I will say it's a little unfair because it's clear that he has the most screen time with the CGI face. And he also goes the farthest on the younger spectrum. So it is a little unfair. But his definitely is the worst of the three. And my brother was texting me earlier today about the film. And I don't necessarily think he's right, but at the same time, as soon as he said it, I was like, okay. Because I said, oh, you didn't like it? He's like, it was okay. It looked a little bit like the Polar Express. And I was like, ooh, that's damning.
Just as the vibe of every once in a while, something looks
a little off.
Grossly uncanny valley to the point of monstrous.
The Philly Express.
Yeah. And I think as the film wears on and they get closer to their actual age, that is less and less. Mm-hmm. But in some of those earlier scenes with De Niro, it's not very good, I don't think. No. And I thought, again, some of the Joe Pesci early scenes, although there is some of that, and a little bit, I guess, with Pacino, I don't really notice it as much. So,
No, and I think a lot of time Pesci and Pacino are framed so that they're never like Robert De Niro looking straight at a camera. Like, there was a great profile of shot of Pesci in one of the restaurants when he's supposed to be at his youngest in this movie, where he looked like Joe Pesci from Casino, but like doesn't look uncannily like it. Like, it's just kind of like looks like it could have been photoshopped from that movie. So
yeah. So I have a whole slew of notes that I may or may not get to all of them. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts. But just again to recap, I absolutely love this film. I'm probably a little bit higher on it than I should be just because I was so excited for it and it ended up just delivering to my expectations, which I thought was pretty much not possible. And I just am so excited that this film happened and it ended up being as good as it was. So
yeah,
whoever wants to go next?
I'll go next. This is the first Scorsese film that I've seen since our episode on Mean Streets, which I very much enjoyed that film. I think I'm sort of in the same vein of Alex, where I was sort of trepidatious about the early promotional material for this film.
That weird audio.
Yeah, I don't
thing
know.
They released.
I don't know what was up with that. That doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't really tell me anything other than like this is a thing that exists, and I'm just like, no, don't do that. Please do not do that. And then as the trailer sort of progressively sort of following, I didn't follow it probably as closely as Alex did, but I did watch every single trailer, and I'm just like, it's like, that's going to be a thing that I'm going to watch. I mean, just because it's Martin Scorsese and he's one of our greatest living like American filmmakers. And I gotta say that I really enjoyed it. It's not as good as a Marvel film, but it's pretty great. Actually, no, I'm just kidding. It's a lot better than a Marvel film. Yeah, this film is pretty incredible for the fact of it even existing, even coming together, that you have all of these very talented actors that sort of like have orbited in the proximity of Scorsese's oeuvre, or people who have been associated with other people who were associated with it, to have Al Pacino finally like sort of among those ranks of a great performance in a Scorsese film. It feels like it's a long time coming, but if it had to be this long and it had to come to head in this, like, it was worth it. It was worth the wait, and it's worth the work that actually went into making the film. So I really, really enjoy it. One of the things that I'm going to mention that I don't think that Alex mentioned is how wickedly funny this film is. It is so like one of my favorite parts of our experience of like communally watching it together was how many times we laughed at all of the lines that were happening in this film. There are too many to keep track of. Al Pacino has one of the centerpiece ones where he's just like breaking down in an office, like as Jimmy Hoffa talking to his aides. I'm like, I'm going to prison. I'm going to prison. It's going to be your fault.
What's great is how quickly he goes from 12 to midnight, or from 11 to 0, where he's just like, yo, people, take this. Yo, I'm going to prison.
I'm going to prison. I'm going to prison. You said to his fathers. Locals, damn it!
He also has these pamphlets that he
Oh
keeps
yeah,
waving around.
I was going to mention
his
that. I
hands.
love that scene, which I think is a different outburst, or at least a different
No, it's the
part
same
of it.
one.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I love that because it's almost as if somehow these pamphlets have been glued to his hands because they are just
From how
like
sweaty he is,
Yeah,
how
like
mad
they're
he is.
just-
That Robert
floating props at this
Yeah,
point.
that
and
Robert
it's one of the
Kennedy is- yeah.
funniest sights.
Kennedy has his nose up my ass. Like, but I think that one of my favorite early lines is when Robert De Niro's character is like first being enlisted to sort of like shake people down for money, and he's like waiting outside the car. He's like, "Where's the money?" He's like, "I don't know. He didn't have it." He's like, "Wait a minute. Wait. So you tell me his mother died and the funeral set him back a bit." It's like, "Yeah, that's what happened. His mother. She's been dying over and over for years now." It's like, oh my god.
Well, there's a great payoff to that too.
Yeah.
Because when he finally acquires this guy, brings him to be shaken
I'll
down.
come back tomorrow. It's like around 10. Yeah, around
No.
10.
First of all, he asks if he can get a ride, and he says, "No, well, just ask your mother if she can give you."
Yeah,
That
and before
was
that,
great.
Robert De Niro was like, "Swear on your mother, swear on your mother,"
Yeah.
while he's beating the shit out of
Yeah.
him. Oh my god.
I mean, that's there's other good early scenes in the film before it gets really into the the meat of the film. Haha. When he's got the meat trailer, that scene's great. When he arrives with the empty meat trailer, he's like, "Oh,
I don't know what to tell you.
I
I don't know what to
I
tell
don't
you.
know.
Yeah,
I
when
don't
he's in the courthouse, and he's like, "And I'm giving you a warning." He's like, "Yes, sir." And it's like, "Not you. If you ever disparage another hard-working man here," I'm just like, "This is ridiculous. This kangaroo court."
Well, also too, that makes it very clear for the audience of how deep the Teamsters had their nails in pretty much everything at that point.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Solidarity.
Oh, man.
Solidarity.
Okay. So,
Solidarity.
I will say, and I'm hijacking this a little bit for you two sides.
Yeah, that's okay.
But
Go for it.
even though Joe Pesci does not deliver a signature Joe Pesci performance,
Oh, no.
and I will get into that a little bit later, my feelings on that, Al Pacino somehow conjures up his previous soul and is able to give like a legit Al Pacino performance in this film.
Yep.
Like there's like he found some way to actually have a real performance at times, but also embody his character from Heat and Any Given Sunday, and he's just full on just solidarity, like just his face and the way he talks and that ridiculous haircut he has to look like Jimmy Hoffa. I mean, oh man, Al Pacino is so great in this. That just warms my heart.
I love the interplay between him and Robert De Niro when Robert De Niro walks out of the office when he's having his blow up, and he's like, "Where are you going?" And I was like, "You can't talk to me like that. I didn't even see you in the background." Somebody made a tweet where they took those screen caps and they're like, when one of your mutuals like writes a subtweet and you think it's aimed at you, but it's actually not. I was just like, that is perfect.
I love the end of that scene when he walks around and takes his coat back off.
Yeah,
as
I
he
was
tried
like-
to get him to stay.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Like, oh, you got to think better of me than that, man. Come on. It's
Yeah.
like-
That's good.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I actually went back and rewatched the first 2 hours of the film, just because I got distracted with something else. But it was really easy to just sit down and rewatch it again. It's just a compulsively watchable like film. But I noticed that the first punctuating kill of the film is foreshadowing the actual most significant like kill of the film. Right,
The way it's kind of blocked.
yeah. I didn't know anything about painting houses until I started, painting houses myself. And then it shows the gun, and then shows the shot, and it's so fast that it's hard to register what exactly that is. But if you do go back, you're like, wow, that's a flex. Martin Scorsese is just flexing on everybody. That's really good. That's. Like, damn.
There's a great line too about disposing of weapons where he throws it into the river. He's
yeah.
everybody uses spot.
Yeah, if they ever drain the water, they'll be able to arm a small army. It's like,
Which is kind of funny because pretty shortly after that we have all of the weapons going down to Florida for
yeah. And I was like, I didn't know what was going on at the time. So when I actually like saw them loading that stuff in, I was like, wait a minute, what year is this? Are they doing the Bay of Pigs? And then like the next like scene is them watching like the unsuccessful Bay of Pigs thing. I was like, oh my god.
really quickly say about the idea of the killings and how that first one echoes that significant one at the end. But the other thing, too, on that thread is that I feel like this is the first time in this kind of unofficial Mafia trilogy where the first two films that Scorsese made in the 90s, like, I feel like those movies, even if I don't think it at all glorifies those protagonists, do come down that there is a certain sexiness to being a gangster.
Oh, yeah.
Like in your movements and like even in the way you kill
Ever since I
people.
was a kid, I wanted to be a gangster.
Yeah.
I would say Goodfellas slightly more so than Casino, but I know
Yeah,
what you're
but
saying.
Casino doesn't have as much of the, whereas because of the, not as much, but I mean, you know what I mean.
There are real consequences in Casino where
I'm talking like in the way they
Goodfellas,
carry themselves.
Oh,
and
okay.
You know
I
what I
got
mean?
you.
Like their sexiness and the allure of it at its best.
Right.
But I think the Irishman through and through, even at their most powerful, what I kind of liked is that...
What it means to live with those consequences.
No, what I was going to say is, like, these actions look like they're performed by 80-year-old men, which is, like, not very graceful, not very... Like, they look pathetic when they are carrying out their hits. They are not doing the, like, Clint Eastwood, Man with No Name, long shot, holding the shotgun and just doing one shot or whatever. Like, when he does his first hit, it looks like a guy who is so scared of being caught. And I'm not saying that's the only reading on that or anything like that, but it has this kind of almost bumbling nature of it where I just think it was kind of interesting that I feel like it's one thing to say that those previous two films glorifies being a gangster, which I don't think it does and whatnot. But, like, if you watch this and still think that, like, this is, I think, so far the opposite in the way that these bodies are moving through space and time that there's just, it's just depressing throughout the way they carry themselves, the way that they do enact any of their orders of business. So,
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that it does sort of like strip away the, what you sort of mentioned, the aforementioned sexiness of seeing like younger sort of actors going about it. It's like maybe there's something that kind of like comes with that, whereas like most of the time these people are just scared shitless.
even the beating that some of the people take don't look like they were rough, but they don't have that almost like calibrated, like perfect stomping, like almost mechanic, just pow, pow, pow. Like
Robert De Niro has to take a breath and step away before he then continues to then smash this man's hand into the curbs. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, I also want to talk about Anna Paquin, because I know there's been some controversy surrounding her character and supposedly the lack of lines that character actually had. But I feel like she was probably one of the most significant on-screen presences of the film, even though she doesn't have as much screen time as the aforementioned major
that means she used it even more than most people did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that just her stage presence, just at least the one significant line that she does have is so cutting, is so biting after a very, very significant moment where it's just absolutely cuts this person to the core and wants nothing to do with them afterwards. And it's just a very powerful presence of a performance that I just really enjoyed that. I want to rewatch it just so that I can keep closer tabs on that character, because I just feel like that character is the silent but a wholly apparent reckoning for this one character, and all the things that come to bear on their soul for the things that they'd have to do.
She's directly responsible for the hardest thing that Robert De Niro has to do in the entire movie, which is also, I think, while I agree with Alex that he's maybe given the least performance in this movie out of the three, that scene is probably the best acted scene, I think, for me, just in a one, from start of the scene to the end of the scene. Yeah. His phone call to Joe.
Oh, that scene is so great because... he's not giving a cartoonish version of trying to concoct lies as he's telling it. He's genuinely trying to be what he thinks he would be, but he's not nailing it as much as he probably thinks he is.
Yeah.
And it's just so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an incredible film. I really do enjoy it. We'll probably talk about it more as we circle around again, but I loved it. Yeah. Nick?
Yeah. I'll keep my opening thoughts brief because I think we're about ready, but to jump into it. But I very much enjoyed this. I thought it was fantastic. Just to give a little counterbalance, I do think this is not going to change anybody's mind about Scorsese, which is also what I think makes it good. Like, he's doing what he's good at, and if not great at. But I don't know that it had to be 3.5 hours, personally. But everything that was here was good. I thought the performances were fantastic. I thought, for the most part, I probably prefer this to both Casino and Goodfellas, because this is definitely what I wanted more from, that I sometimes get underwhelmed by those two, which is an actual kind of reflective attitude. Not that gangster films has to have that, obviously, that's a choice. But I very much welcomed it here, and I appreciate the fact that it's coinciding with, these four legends, the director and the three actors, kind of twilight years, that, of course, it would take this long before they start to really reckon with, like, has every career choice been good? And I think there's a real spiritual connection between the mafia guys that they play and also the industry people that they are, and I absolutely love that angle. I gotta say, what really makes me love this movie, like, compared to some of the other elements at play, is that I think this is probably the best, and so I don't, like, there never needs to be another one, but Jimmy Hoffa movie we're ever gonna get. And I like that this movie isn't explicitly about Jimmy Hoffa, as in he's not the focus, but I think it is probably best summed up that, like, I think the best version of a Jimmy Hoffa movie is where Jimmy Hoffa can't even be the main character in his own movie, because he will always be a supporting player in the organizations that he ends up,
being entangled with. Yeah,
affiliated with and whatnot. So I think Al Pacino is giving maybe his best performance here in a long time, if not forever. I think everything involving him is fantastic, whether it's a moment of comedy or a moment of drama. And I think the loyalty and the banter between him and Robert De Niro were the high points of this movie.
It's funny because a great scene, actually probably one of my favorite scenes of the whole movie, is the award presentation evening, which is a pretty long scene. It's actually like 25 minutes. And there's a lot happening in that one scene where De Niro is receiving his award for being the head of whatever Teamsters thing he's part of.
He was elected president of like a chapter.
No, this is after that, and I don't remember exactly the reason why he's. But at any rate, he's getting some sort of presentation of something, and everything that happens in this scene. And again, it's a very long scene, but we have individual moments between De Niro and Pacino, De Niro and Pesci.
Two sides of the triangle are almost always conversing at one point.
Pacino and Pesci have their only one-on-one scene in this
entire
scene.
movie.
Yeah.
And
then we have another scene involving Pesci and De Niro, where the ring ceremony happens and that all weird shit. And then all the events surrounding here. We even have what's his name? The guy who plays Silvio Dante playing the singing guy who's giving a very Scorsese-like performance up there. We have the dancing people on stage as people are dancing in the crowd. We even get Anna Paquin dancing with Al Pacino's Jimmy Hoffa, and a very awkward look from Joe Pesci looking on, as there is all kinds of weird vibes coming from him throughout the entirety of the film, which obviously Peggy picks up on. That scene's just fantastic. There's so much involved in it, so much that comes from it, but what I was specifically referring to is when De Niro basically tells him that they're going to kill you if you keep doing this, and he's like, they wouldn't dare.
It's been decided.
They wouldn't dare.
It's been decided.
Almost he doesn't believe that shit
either.
Yeah,
well, because the language there is they. And that's what... And it's kind of like... I would say Hoffa knows how things are going to happen, which means that the only way this would happen is if they use you to do it, and we're good.
You wouldn't do it, yeah.
Which actually...
That's the tragedy.
Joe Pesci delivers probably the best line of the whole movie right before this exchange happens, when he tells Robert De Niro's character, Frank Sheeran, that if they can kill a president, they can kill the president of a organization or whatever he is, or president. And that's just cutting straight to the chase of these are powerful people. And also, oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm geeking out.
No, please
But,
keep.
This is your episode, buddy.
The look on Joe Pesci's face after he says, "Well, Jimmy's a big deal too." Just the way he smashes his face together to say, "Is he?" Oh, Joe Pesci's so good.
He's up there. It's like
so good.
He's very, very good.
It makes my heart so happy that they were able to dig him up and get him to come out and do this movie.
Yeah, because he didn't want to do it.
First,
And he's not Joe Pesci in this at all.
Oh, yeah.
He is so reserved in this, which I think makes his portrayal even better because it connects the audience to with who I'm guessing what the real Russell Buffalino was actually like even more, because you're thinking more about, God, this guy is so reserved and not as fiery as the usual gangster, which it's serving dual purposes there.
He's playing against type, and it's all the better for it in that.
But it's also
seeing
It's such a good performance.
you see his
though.
character.
Yeah.
He's such a good performer, and he's so unlike how the sort of type that he's been typecast into, that you see his character first and foremost, and not so much himself. Even though he is who he is, and he's awesome.
Not to mention, I think the idea, too, at least for me, that was at play is that Joe Pesci, we've seen him in Martin Scorsese films, as what we're talking about, that archetype of him. But I feel like having that in the back of our mind does the heavy lifting, where we don't have to actually see Russell hold a gun or do something to know what he's capable of, because we do kind of have this real-world relationship with Joe Pesci, the performer, that is like, because this movie doesn't call for it script-wise, they don't have to, force it, and we're still... I mean, the performance in and of itself sells it completely, but I like that the real-world context of what we expect from him is also always kind of under the surface of, if things went worse than they do in the movie, because if anything, they go okay in the sense that Joe Pesci is able to solve his problems, to a degree of whatever, but that is always a possibility that he could erupt at any time.
Yeah.
But, I'll end my opening thoughts and just say that I'm excited to dig through a bunch of different random sequences, because I actually think that's what makes this movie, is that while I didn't personally love the start to finish, overarching structure, because it was the same structure he always does, though props to Thelma Schumacher, who basically always, what I assume, takes an unwatchable mess as far as what Scorsese gives her and makes it into one of the most enthralling ways to kill 3 hours, because there's no way that, you think of how short a lot of in these kind of movies, at least his mafioso pictures, how short a lot of these scenes are, that's a sprawling and almost thankless task to somehow not only put it to screen to where it makes sense, but then also to make it fly by like it does. So props to her as always. But I will say, on a scene-by-scene basis, I was certainly eating it up. And I think the whole dramatic inertia at the center of De Niro's character of Frank is kind of one of the most, if not the most, fascinating gangster he's created, Scorsese, because at the end of the day, we don't actually... Frank is almost the most sympathetic gangster he could create, so to speak, compared to the previous ones, because while he is never less than complicit with the actions that but his gangster comrades are performing, because he's doing it too and whatnot, unlike the previous two, and I would consider Henry Hill and Ace Rothstein and Joe Pesci in either one of those movies, unlike those people that came before, he actually never looked like he's having any fun or happy about any of this. There are moments of ecstasy for those gangsters that came before him, and I would say the almost high they get off of the power. This is so much more of a company yes man character, and that's kind of the whole point, and the way, and that's why he identifies with Hoffa so much, because Hoffa's standing up for guys like him, just not in his particular line of business, and that's why he sees a savior almost in that character. But you don't get a scene of him snorting cocaine off of a prostitute's back, and it's not because people around him weren't doing that is because that wouldn't. In fact, the only time I think it's implied the only time he ever strays from his marriage, we see the one scene. I actually don't think he does it ever again after that. He pretty much kind of looks uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
After the fact, because he sees
he
sees the waitress.
It's never a good time to leave your wife, but that was the time.
That's when he literally leaves his first wife and goes to his new one. Then.
Yeah, but that's what I mean, though. Like,
okay.
I don't think he from that point on looks behind him at like what else he could have. I think from that, like, I think his loyalty starts to get so rooted in like
that's really not part of the story in this film at all for any of these characters, really.
No, but I don't think that it's
women,
not happening for certain characters.
No.
I mean, some characters, some very minor characters, make fun of or make jokes about it. I mean, Ray Romano's character is literally marrying the whatever you call it, isn't he? No.
That's his daughter getting married at the end. It is really weird.
Okay, you know what? That confused the hell out of me.
I understand that. I'm
because
in the same boat you were.
The way they were walking down the aisle, and I was just like...
Well, he stayed up there, though. Like, it was weird.
He's giving her away.
I know, and I got confused because...
I felt the same way you did.
We didn't watch it with subtitles, which I normally do, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to miss a few things, especially in a movie that goes this fast. So I generally thought, not that he was marrying his daughter, but that he was marrying a younger person.
Yes.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying. Why
that
you
makes
thought
more
that.
sense.
Yep. I thought the same thing the first time, and then when I went back, I was like, oh, okay. There's even a line of dialogue where they mention they're going to her wedding, and he's giving his daughter away to the second time after the first guy was a piece of shit or something like that.
It was so weird because I remember when that scene started, and they were moving. I'm like, oh, he's giving his daughter away. And then for whatever reason, the moment they got up to the altar, I'm like, oh, he's marrying her because of the way it was blocked.
He's standing here, yeah.
But, okay. All right. That makes a lot more sense then. If anything, that makes me more charitable towards that character. Because I was like, why did they... he seemed like... Not like he was a good guy, but like he didn't seem like a person who would do that.
Well, hello, where is this coming from? Like, it turns out... Oh, okay, yeah.
So anyway... but like I said, to end it on that note, is that I don't think Robert De Niro as Frank is in this for the glory, and like he just, you know...
He really is a working stiff until he wasn't.
And wants to be a good boy, so to speak. And I think that's the only ounce of humanity that we can latch onto and sympathize with. Not so much that we can agree with his actions or whatever, but there's a human pathos and tragedy behind a man who is quite literally loyal to a fault. And when he does these things, he's not even like okay with it, because you can have the Henry Hills or whatever have their like mental psychotic freakouts after they do things, and you can say like, oh, you know, that's him atoning for it. But it's like reality, no, they're just like pissed off that they even feel anything after, and therefore like they're just trying to work out that kind of rage.
Yeah, I will say it's a little hard in Goodfellas and also Casino, because those are based on accounts from people actually giving their accounts of what happened, and those people also went out of their way to not incriminate themselves in
absolutely.
their accounts, so they're probably not actually factual.
Which I totally agree with.
But in doing so, those two characters never really do anything that's that bad in those films.
Right.
Like, they're doing drugs.
It's always the other ones.
And they know about things, but they're never directly involved with anything that's like murder.
And here it's the opposite. It's like Frank's really not gaining anything from this, and yet he's also carrying out orders that even at some times he doesn't agree with and whatnot. So.
Which, I guess I'll go into one of my... yeah.
No. Just because I will also say I'm a huge fan of when a movie has a killer final line. And in my opinion, this is probably this year's best closing line in a movie. But would you leave the door open just a little bit? That coupled with the actual shot, but I think the line in and of itself is significant too. But I think the idea that if that door is closed, then he's truly alone, and it you know, truly leaves it so that nobody can walk through, and yet for some reason he still has hope that somebody would. Is one of the most gutting things.
Obviously, a great callback to everything happening with Pacino's character earlier in the film too, where
leaving the door open,
and why he wanted the door to be open and everything. So it's nice.
Yeah.
So I will say, probably the most interesting part of the film to me is the relationship between Russell Bufalino and Frank Sheeran. Early on in this film, even the way that they meet each other is kind of by chance, and Joe Pesci helps him out with something like that, and clearly has this, persona of being this, I knew he was an important person. Maybe he owned the gas station. And then he finds out really who he is later on in the film.
He owned the whole highway.
Yeah. But as the film progresses on, looking at Joe Pesci's character kind of like a pimp is very interesting, because just to some of the lines of dialogue that I specifically wanted to go back and rewatch, and they were verbatim pretty much for how I was remembering them, are really haunting. Really, he says multiple times throughout the film to Frank Sheeran when discussing events that have either happened in the past or are going to happen in the future. He says over and over, he says, "Do you know how strong I made you?" And just sort of trying to create this idea that ownership and that I made you this strong, just the implied idea that you would be nothing without me, is very interesting, especially in the whole pimp prostitute kind of parallel I'm making. Everything that De Niro does early on is him getting a taste of the good life and him getting to live on and all these things. And then
they're not paid their favors that are then repaid with other favors.
Even before that, he's just kind of given this idea that you can go help out and deliver the meat, and you can be involved in this. And it's when he has his very first slip up, which is when he bombs bombs the laundromat that's owned by
almost
Harvey Keitel.
Bombs it,
Well, owned by Harvey Keitel. He's told by Harvey Keitel, "You don't know how good of a friend you have. This guy's a really good friend." And then later in the film, "You don't know how strong I made you." And he literally just repeats a line that he says verbatim to Sharon Stone in Casino, where he says, "No one can fuck with you anymore." And that is just the implied ownership of that, while at the same time trying to create strength it's just so interesting. And he follows this, Buffalino does, all the way through to his death, even in that really awkward prison scene at the end, which is fan-fucking-tastic.
Well, when he's going to church?
Well, but before that, they're actually sitting at a table eating when they're having grape juice and dipping their bread into it. Joe Pesci basically...
Like Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy was a good guy.
Yes! He comes back and starts talking about, he was actually a pretty nice man. I always felt bad what happened to him. It's like, oh, God.
It's like,
this is so bad.
You don't have to
You're
live with
such a terrible person.
You don't have to live with that. I literally have to live with that every day.
But,
but like you just brought up, though, too, the fact that line comes with the grape juice is, like, just that much sweeter. Because I just love the kind of, like, the literal, I don't know, visual metaphor there of, like, trying to relive the glory days in a way, but in somebody like Joe Pesci's character, he has the luxury to try to rewrite his own narrative and where he stood back then, because he was able to get other people to do the actual bad shit, you know. And
also
Robert De Niro doesn't have that luxury.
Nope.
Two, he tried to create this idea of inclusion, giving him the ring and saying that, he's part of a club, but he's not really part of a club. Kind of very similar to Henry Hill. He's not a made man. He's not actually part of it. He's just their lackey for the most part.
It for me, it's like Robert De Niro is mistaking protection with stipulations as love, and it's not the same thing at all.
Which his daughter obviously sees straight through. Oh my goodness, the scene where she receives the ice skates and then finds, I think Santa put a little something extra in there, and she got the $100 bill. The look she gives Joe Pesci after, oh my God, that is just telling such a story without any dialogue.
Well, they have an entire little mini arc that runs throughout the film, which we had kind of commented on, but the idea that she's never okay with, obviously, with Russell at all because of what not only he represents, but what he is getting out of her father and turning him into. And I love the idea that when it does like really come to a head when she's enamored as a child with Jimmy Hoffa, because Jimmy Hoffa knew how to talk to children.
He also gives her ice cream. There's something, I'm going to get into this too, but there are two things that this film really focuses on with Jimmy Hoffa as character detail, which I don't know if they're good or bad character detail. I think they're probably good, but it is obsessed with the idea that he fucking loves ice cream.
Oh, yeah.
As he is shown eating ice cream, although it does come back as it's not mentioned, it just keeps showing him eating ice cream. When he gets out of prison, De Niro's character goes and brings him the hot dogs, and he has the line of dialogue that says, the only thing that he liked more than ice cream were these specific hot dogs. I don't know. That was fantastic.
He was eating ice cream when Kennedy was assassinated.
Yeah. Holy shit, we got to get into that, too.
Oh, yeah.
Just his reaction to that is pretty good. And then how about having the flag raised back after that?
Oh.
Yeah, after he's leaving the Teamsters building
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah, that's
Hey,
pretty...
put that back up. Holy shit.
Oh, shit.
So the other, oh shoot, I had it right there. Oh no, this
Joe Pesci and Frank.
no. This
boy.
was,
Oh, brother.
this was.
Or no, you were going to talk about Peggy?
No, I was talking about Jimmy Hoffa and Pacino.
And,
No,
because I had mentioned about Peggy with Joe Pesci and Jimmy Hoffa and the vying attentions between the two of them, and I thought you would go off of that tangent.
Okay, no, I have it. I'm back. We're back. I was talking about the two character traits, one of which was his continuous eating of ice cream, and then the other one is actually almost annoying at some point, is his continuous insistence on calling anybody he doesn't like a cocksucker.
There's a montage on Twitter.
He has to say it like 80 times throughout the film. It is way over the top, and it better be like an actual thing that Jimmy Hoffa did, because it is way. It's definitely saying something, and I don't know what it is, but
This may be offensive, but I'm going to say it.
Freudian.
well, I mean,
No,
yeah,
but I was going to say, does it have anything to do with J. Edgar Hoover?
Could
I just
Sure.
as far as okay, because bear with me here.
Mm-hmm.
I just think of like people in this certain power, whether it's mafiosa or just the leader of anything that kind of gains an almost unnaturally unbalanced version of
Right.
whatever. But I'm assuming that J. Edgar Hoover in general is an enemy to all of them, in a sense. And so I don't know why, but I feel like. I don't know. I just thought maybe there was some weird residual hatred from that guy, and then so he's conflating almost subconsciously with the presumed actions of, if not at one point, one of the biggest, adversaries with. I don't know why, but I randomly got a weird J. Edgar Hoover vibe from that whole thing.
I could see that.
I don't know why.
It's not just one person, because the most is Tony Pro, who he calls that, but he is not only calling Tony Pro that, he's calling a lot of other people. Also, Stephen Graham as Tony Pro also was fantastic, I thought.
Is that the small guy or the small? Or
Yeah, he's the guy who he
Came to the meeting in a Speedo. Short shorts and
he came in shorts, but yes, he's the
that
guy.
meeting's great.
That is great. Their conflict in prison is also great. And the "you people" line, which is not the first time that somebody's used that, but that was also pretty damn good. But that meeting is so good later on in the film when they're all sitting there, and after he tries to give him the olive branch and whatever, and then he goes back, and it's just two people just eating each other and having a pissing contest. And there is a great cut that goes to De Niro where he's just kind of like manically laughing. He's like, "Ha ha ha! Come on, Jimmy!" I don't know. It was just great.
Yeah.
That is some fantastic editing there. But yeah, I mean that just pretty much ends with him saying, "I'm gonna murder your grandchildren," and it's just very fucked up. But Stephen Graham is absolutely fantastic on Boardwalk Empire, playing Al Capone, and he's really having a lot of the same characteristics in this character, and it is just wonderful in my opinion.
Yeah.
So we were talking. I'm sorry, I've got so much that I'm trying to spew out here, but we were talking before about Peggy and and was there any more you wanted to pull on that thread?
Well, I was just gonna sum it up by saying I like that her loyalties, so to speak, between those two men are very pronounced and very public too, because it's not so much it's when they're at that wedding or whatever they're at. Is that a wedding? I can't remember the scene where she dances with Jimmy. Or was that the awards ceremony?
Yeah,
it's
that
award
ceremony.
So the award ceremony is when she asked Jimmy to dance, at the wedding and whatnot, when she's grown up and whatnot. And the look Joe Pesci gives her. And I love that. I feel like in another director or whatever, there could have been a danger of somehow almost subliminally making Pesci's character look like a pedophile. Like, as far as that could have been an undercurrent of, whatever. But Scorsese and Pesci, they're pros or whatever, that I never actually bought that was in any way. But
he's just sort of envious of that adoration.
Yeah, and the fact that he doesn't have it and what that says. And I think that's also one of the reasons why he'll never completely trust Frank. But I think like he doesn't trust a person that quote unquote can't keep his daughters quote unquote in line, which he can in a way, not for long. But but I actually think that it's kind of funny how Peggy I think is directly responsible for Russell's kind of seeds of distrust in him in the way that she treats him, and it's kind of like she's sabotaging her dad. Well,
but not intentionally, because she's just able to see right through people, and that why was she? You have to think she gave a presentation on Jimmy Hoffa for her, like sort of like
wearing the pin
and everything, and talking about all the great things that he does. Like, who else of her father's associates could she like make an honest presentation for? Including her own father.
Well,
couldn't even do that for her own father or any of the other people he's associated with. Jimmy Hoffa, though, like he is an exception. Like even Robert De Niro's character like points the fact of it, and he's like, you know what? He doesn't have a name like Whispers or like the Knife, or he doesn't stomp on people's hands like I do. And it's like that's like a moment of self awareness. Like, oh wow, it's like
he also isn't someone who got caught or got whacked either. He was somebody who understood how to slide under suspicion from whoever, and also command this I guess envious level of respect. But if you really peel back the onion, he's just a really horrible person. Oh god.
Yeah, they all are.
We really need to talk about probably the most dramatic moment in the entire movie, which is this is like hard for me to get out.
Shut up.
Did Jimmy Hoffa's son actually buy a fish?
That seems great.
It is.
Yeah, that is.
So you bought a fish. What kind of fish? I don't know.
That's easily.
That's really Martin Scorsese at his best, right there.
Oh yeah, that was the hardest. I was laughing at the whole movie for good reason, I think.
Yeah.
But
how do you not know what fish you bought?
I'm just trying to get this story straight. If I ever have to relate it to somebody else, the fuck who you got to relate it to is like, oh, be careful back there, like your son, he got a fish.
Well, it's also great too because when Pacino does get in the car, you never put a fish in your car.
I know he's taking it so
fish.
literally.
Yeah.
But I love that scene because it is genuinely hilarious while never ceasing to be terrifying. Because if this conversation goes off the rails, I could have seen a version where his son got whacked for almost like no reason. Just,
absolutely.
Just to like tie up loose ends.
Yeah.
If this whole conversation didn't.
He's all hopped up on murder. Like you don't want to get on this guy's bad side.
Later on, when there's a monologue being given by Frank Sheeran about everyone who was involved in Jimmy Hoffa's murder actually ended up going to jail. They couldn't prove the murder, but they went for something else. That he's like, even his son, he went for 10 months for something with a car or something. Just his not being able to actually explain what it was is pretty fantastic. Yeah, that scene's very good. All the characters involved in that scene, and even just the way it's presented, I feel like Jimmy Hoffa almost looks like a child, not knowing if it's okay to get into the car or not. He's kind of looking like, this doesn't seem right, but I know all you, so this is probably
Frank's
fine.
here, so yeah.
That's right.
Oh, God.
Ooh, boy.
Yeah, that sucks.
Although, very similar to when Joe Pesci's character of Tommy DeVito gets killed in Goodfellas. As soon as he walks in the house and sees no one else in it, he very quickly realizes that something is off, and he immediately wants to leave. And that's so well done. And even though this is very much potentially fictionalized in terms of how the actual events went down, whatever, just the idea of De Niro, this is his only chance, and he just is not the prettiest hit he does. As he's running out the door, and he just kind of has to quickly put the gun to his head, and it's just the way it all plays out. And
and I
everything-
get the feeling that if he didn't do it in the split second he did, he would not have had the nerve to do it at any other moment.
Yeah.
And that's why it comes out so unnaturally forced.
Yeah,
It's really heartbreaking given the fact that, like Jimmy Hoffa enters the house. He sees that nobody's there. He becomes immediately suspicious. He turns to Frank. He walks past Frank. Had he only looked down and saw the gun in his hand, he might have. But he never even thought. He never, in the end, he never thought to even second guess his friend.
What's also great too is that Frank is trying to hide that he has the gun with him, and then Hoffa even asked, "Do you have your little friend with you?" He's like, "Oh, yep, got her right here." Fuck.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Something bad could happen there. Oh no, you can't trust these
He
guys.
never doubted.
I want to
heartbreaking.
praise, even though he's not in the movie for much, especially not as much as I would have liked, but I do think Ray Romano was a great addition to Scorsese's little revolving door, because I've always thought him as an underutilized, I know he's the dopey guy from Everybody Loves Raymond, but A, he's very good at that. But B, he's been doing a lot of great dramatic roles in roles that not a lot of people have seen.
He was a film that I didn't really love. I thought he was one of the best parts of The Big Sick.
Yes, absolutely. He's fantastic in that. Him and Holly Hunter are pretty much my favorite parts of that movie.
I would agree.
He's great in that. Was just in a very random little movie, which wasn't very good, but he was great in it, called Paddleton or something, with one of the Duplass brothers.
Oh, okay.
It was a cancer drama, so it was very at your heartstrings. But
I'm sorry, just the name of it. I don't know why.
I can't remember what it's called. It's like Paddleton or Paddle something. It was named after the ball game they
Thought of
I know
Paddington.
every time I see it, I think of Paddington. So
but his best dramatic role, just Evan, I'll get right back to, but in the show, which was always mediocre at best, but always had great moments. But Parenthood, which was created by Jason Kantine, the guy who brought Friday Night Lights to the small screen and for one of the greatest television shows of all time. But later on in the show, I think the show hit its peak when it introduced a character of Ray Romano, because he wasn't in the earlier parts of the show, as an adult who finds out he has autism. And I've never seen that kind of storyline play out in fiction in general. And he plays it so good because he's introduced with his neuroses and social awkwardness, but it's never really, not clear, but you take it whatever way you want to. But then, the next season, they start to pull that back, and he officially goes and gets diagnoses, and how heartbreaking that is for him, not because he now thinks of himself differently, but it questions what he's done up until that point, and it's just, he plays it beautifully, and that's one of his, and so anyway, ever since that moment, I've always thought he should do more dramatic roles, and this is sort of a comedic role for him, obviously, but he very much stands up there with all of them in the room, and can hold it together. I mean, for his line with Frank in the very beginning when he's like, "So I'm gonna represent you no matter what." So
But you could tell me if you.
Yeah.
You want to know if I did it?
Yeah. Well, I worked very hard for them. When I wasn't stealing from them. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's funny though, because at that point I don't think we know explicitly how tied he is, how connected, I mean, we know there's a reason why he's in that chair and whatnot, but it's literally the very next scene when I think he takes him, or that's the scene before, I can't remember.
No, it's later on. I mean, they show that he is a Buffalino as well, because he's his cousin. But
you never know if someone's ostracized, but when he brings him through the restaurant.
It's either the next scene or the scene after that. It's very soon after that, where he's in the restaurant and giving the formal introduction.
Yes, which I thought was legit as shit, because I thought he was actually kind of a buffoon, and that maybe he was just the joke of the family or something like that. But
or is he actually kind of in Behind the Candelabra? He's actually like Scott Bakula's character, where he's really just looking out for more poontang for him.
Oh, I'm sure he is, but he's clearly in it. You know what I mean? Because he is the one. It's not like he's handing him off to somebody else, but he actually gets to make the rounds and basically, at least for a moment, pretend like he's just.
He has a role to play.
Oh, absolutely, and he is okay with playing it.
But again, I think he's definitely portrayed more as a scout and a really tied-in lawyer that has a purpose for all of them. So one aspect that I wanted to mention, which is a really silly sort of offshoot that this film has. But I thought it was wonderful, and also a very good telling scene for the relationship building between Jimmy Hoffa and Frank Sheeran. And it comes in their first action together, which is where Frank is brought in and has his first opportunity with him, where he destroys all the taxi cabs. The scene that follows is the guy who's his current number one explaining how things are done, and also explaining that Jimmy doesn't like to drink. He also doesn't like watermelon, so we're going to put alcohol in watermelon. But the thing that's great about
we like watermelon.
So here's the thing. The fact that this clueless, bumbling buffoon totally thinks he's getting away with it is great. And then
but he
in the
looks
following
crazier than he probably would with just like having a bottle.
Because he's just sitting there just manically eating watermelon then during this meeting.
Like a squirrel.
Yeah. And then, does anybody want any of this? Jimmy, you want to say, I don't like watermelon.
And Robert De Niro hasn't like touched it.
Oh, no. He's very, very much, and he keeps looking down at it and looking at Jimmy Hoffa, and it's awesome just because he obviously knows what's going on, and this fucking other guy is thinking he's totally pulling this off, and yet he's just, for some reason, like eating an entire watermelon in a short 12-minute meeting. And it is... it's pretty great.
I completely forgot about it until you brought that up. But yes, that is one of the best, the high points of that movie.
It's just such a fun little gag. And
there's actually a lot, I think, here about people. You were just talking about Ray Romano, quote unquote, playing his part. But this movie actually kind of suggests that the mob only works if there are a bunch of people that just play their part, and not just in that obvious haha moment as far as like people have to carry out their orders, but there are a lot of stooges in the mob. There are a lot of dumb people who get to where they are because at the end of the day they don't know any better, and it's perfect to keep them where they are.
You can't spell conspiracy without
they're not going to cross you if they're just too focused on how they can drink in a watermelon. Than not drink at all.
That's what's so awesome about what happens throughout the rest of the film is exactly what we're talking about. Jimmy Hoffa in one of his early meetings with Frank Sheeran talks all about why he keeps someone who isn't the brightest as his number two, because I don't really want him to challenge me as number one, which obviously comes back to completely bite him, is after he goes to jail, then that guy ascends and everybody loves him because he'll do whatever they want.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it is, it's interesting. And then there's also a great moment later on in the film where there's just back and forth of Fitzsimmons, I think it is, and Jimmy Hoffa pretty much going back and forth on bombing each other's properties.
Yeah, that montage was great.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Even the little cut.
Well, I was going to say that it ends with Jimmy Hoffa's wife being fired from her job, and unlike that horrendous trailer for that new Mark Ruffalo Todd Haynes film, which has him, oh boy, did somebody put a bomb in my car, like this is actually earned of someone like literally thinking, oh no, is it too late? Am I going to die?
Actually, to return to one thing I had said earlier about how I think this movie, particularly with Frank, shows how pathetic gangsterism looks when you're just staring at it straight on, and in that kind of the way they move through physical space. The hit that Frank has to commit on that guy, I'm going to forget his name, but...
Whispers?
Yeah, is that the one who's in the restaurant?
First? Yeah.
No.
No, sorry.
The one who's in the restaurant with his family.
Joey Gallo.
Yes, him. Mm-hmm. That is one of the worst hits ever when it's actually lined up for him. I mean, he's doing it in public, so obviously it's not that I don't buy it as far as like how could he like do it that botched whatever, but like he has the drop on him. All he had to pretty much do was walk up behind him and take it out and whatever, but he can't. I'm just saying, like, the way it's staged, it is in no way this kind of, Les Samurai, suave gangster move of just coming up to the table, pulling out the Tommy gun, doing that, or even, just one tap, whatever, to the side of the head. It's like he comes in, he zigzags to the bar, he turns around, he starts to approach him, then he's taking out his gun. By that point, he does shoot him, but he somehow doesn't shoot him in the brain, and then it's a firefight, through the restaurant.
Well, I mean,
it was a firefight.
a lot is happening in a really short amount of time there.
Oh, I agree, but I'm saying this is how they carry out their business.
No, it's true. Although there is a line of dialogue, and he actually does first have to disable the bodyguard, but he can't kill him because he isn't the person who he's contracted to go take care of. Yeah. So he's got to disable him, but not kill him, and at the same time then kill him. And all this is happening in a matter of 4 seconds.
No, in the scene and the explanation given, it's like it's believable. It is whatever. But it's a far cry from the suit-wearing, just kind of, I don't know.
But it feels more real. I mean,
it does.
You look at like when
I feel like this
Joe
is
Pesci.
the work of a guy, Scorsese, in his 70s, maybe slightly more mature and less enamored by
the look.
Yeah.
I was going to say, though, the one that I always go back to is when it's a great scene, but when Joe Pesci takes out a very early performance by Samuel L. Jackson in Goodfellas, and it's really when they start to take care of all the people who are part of the Lufthansa heist because Robert De Niro is very paranoid that they're going to talk. But that scene is just like slow motion, like you see everything with the gun happening and you hear like the slow motion sound of the gun going off. Like he is clearly trying to like give you this pornographic look of somebody murdering another human being. I'm with you.
Yeah, and how about the scene in Casino where it's not a death, but when De Niro grabs the cheater, and brings him to the vice, like that is like I get to just kind of stand here, look super cool while my cronies do this shit, and
you don't fuck around in here.
Yeah, it is a commanding presence, whereas Frank is never a person who will have a commanding.
Because he doesn't have command.
No, he doesn't, and I think his hits are an extension of that.
Yeah,
he's just trying to hold on to it.
I would agree.
Yeah.
We hit on a little bit, but something we'll definitely should mention on is. Actually, is the de-aging worthwhile here? Is it going to be used more frequently going forward? I feel like, at least from what I've seen, this is for sure the most extensive I've seen this used in an entirety of a film.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had a lot of films that have done specific scenes, and some of them better than others. But this film is extensive in the use of it, and some of it is not as aggressive as other parts, but is it any good here? I think it's not too bad, even if some of it's not as good as the rest.
The World War II thing was sort of...
that was singled out in a trailer for good reason.
Yeah. It doesn't look good. I mean, I think that it grows on me in other sort of like situations. Maybe it has... I think that has a lot to do with like the lighting of each respective scene. Whereas like with an outdoor scene with Robert De Niro's character just
in sunlight,
yeah, it looked really, really kind of uncanny. Versus like when it's like around like a very dim dinner table with candlelit and stuff like that warmer lighting. I feel like does it more. It
kind of like
does
Jeff
a lot
Bridges
more favor.
in Tron Legacy.
I think that.
Most people cite that as like the worst ever.
Oh yeah, I mean, but back then, like, what else did we have?
I was gonna
what
say,
the fuck else did we have?
I was blown away by it because it was really the first-ish time that it was mainstream,
right?
And it was in a very dark scene. So the idea, I'm sorry, but I probably don't have a problem as big of a problem with that as I do like a Grand Moff Tarkin walking around when we have the better technology.
Yeah, that was weird.
Not to mention it's about a computer program, but anyway.
Yeah, that whole Grand Moff Tarkin thing sort of irked me for other reasons, adjacent to even the use of the technology. Just the fact that this actor is dead, and now you're just resurrecting them.
Oh, well, that's a whole other...
motion capture and some other fucked
We've
up shit.
blown past that question.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, it's fucked. But is it happening? Yeah, it's happening.
My 2 cents on the de-aging is that, as someone who's always been very aghast by it in a lot of examples, it definitely worked for me here. I thought at its worst it was distracting, and at its best it was very good. But I will admit, throughout the entire picture, I never got the sense that it was necessary when you could have casted another person. Like, the fact that we're moving away from just, I would say, classical standard movie making, like how do you show the passage of time? Well, you can cast a younger person who can be made to look like... I never got that was wholeheartedly necessary to capture, quote-unquote, the totality of Frank, because until I can't perceive the difference, I'm much more in the camp of I'd rather have a realistic performance, which is not the actor's fault, but, something that fits in with what's happening, like the reality of a situation. And this comes from the same... This movie is not as good, so I'm not bringing this up quality-wise, but this comes in the same year where I was kind of reminded of the power of what casting can do when, for example, in Dr. Sleep, instead of trying to digitally create Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall, Mike Flanagan in that movie casted two different people and made them to look like them. And that's all it took for me to kind of like lose my breath the moment they first showed up and go, oh man, that's pretty good, and whatever, and then go with it. Whereas de-aging, the technology is almost the opposite. It almost like it takes you a while to warm up to it, and then you're in that groove, and you're never going to not notice it, but whatever. But I'm still, maybe I'm old-fashioned and I'm get off my lawn, but it's still not to the point where I think it's actually better than just old-fashioned, like, how do you approach this? Well, we can just solve it in post. I don't think solve it in post is something that should be an approach to things that are fundamental. And in this case, it is, because it's showing a passage of time and it's a foundational background for a character that we have to get to know and whatnot.
So two things. The first being that this idea that we don't really need to focus on the true talent of makeup and camera and lighting.
That's
people,
crazy.
Because it's sort of like the...
That's a real slap in the face.
Well,
I'm just saying to people who do their job well.
The sort of idea of... And this is a little bit concerning just because we've seen in the early days of CGI just for effects in film where it was married together with physical effects, and if it was done well, it could be fantastic. Now, many films just choose to shoot in a green screen and just add everything in later, and it is terrible. So I'm a little concerned about exactly what you're saying, is that, A, you could do really good work with makeup and other sort of physical things, and two, this sort of idea, and this is something that Scorsese said that I was really kind of surprised that he said.
You're about to say what I'm in total agreement, so say what you're going to say.
So what I was going to say...
Because really quick, before you say it, I'm not saying it, but to give context and to say, we watched the random bonus feature that basically auto-plays after the feature, in which a conversation between him and the three actors...
But Scorsese has said, and I was, again, surprised to hear this, that we've made it, and we can now show CGI and we can de-age people. We've done it, and so there's really no need to go back. Hearing that from him is kind of disturbing.
Especially for someone who's quote-unquote against theme park rides.
Well...
I'm just saying, like...
Yeah, but...
you're kind of giving in to the same bullshit that where you think that money can basically buy...
He's giving it to it because it makes his argument, which is really concerning, because... I had just a little bit less respect for him after I heard him say that, because it actually came from his mouth.
Okay. I actually had a different quote from that same bonus feature thing, but the same feeling that I think you may have, where I was just like slightly disappointed, where when he was talking to the three actors and they're talking about the de-aging process, he literally, for like 60 seconds, goes on this random tangent where he admits that during the filming of some of the scenes when they had to be younger versus when they're that, like, oh yeah, what was so fascinating to me is that some of the acting that was done, one of you gets up from a chair and this guy to the left of me, he stops and he said, hey, he's supposed to be 20 years younger. He can't get up that fast. And it's like, it's unbelievable, like what you have to think about. And they're all going, yeah, I know, right? And so I go up to him and I say, hey, you can't get out of the chair, whatever.
Yeah.
it blows my mind that a director as good as Martin Scorsese and actors as good as all three of those guys are all in agreement that that is somehow not embarrassing to admit in public. That basically they don't know how to act, which is not true literally, but that is de-aging in a nutshell. You are thinking that the technology is somehow doing the work for you, and therefore you get lazy in your performance. And I think a person who is actually inhabiting their character because they are physically embodying it will never make that mistake if they're a good actor. But the fact that Al Pacino should have to keep track, not should have to, but has to be told, oh, you're 20 years older, so, you know, or 20 years younger, so get out of that chair faster. Like, that is such a weird... They were, like, clapping themselves on the back when I was like, no, you are staring in the face of what you think is progress, but is actually 2 steps back.
There's another thing, and you're already pulling at this thread that I was thinking about when you were mentioning just the look of hits in this film, which does look like an old person pulling it off, but it's because we have 75-year-old Robert De Niro playing 30-year-old Robert De Niro.
That was one of those things.
Yeah, it looks like his face, kind of, but he still walks like a 75-year-old man.
That was, like, thematically where I was like, this is so weirdly anachronistic, but I think it works for the piece
this
and
context.
and the mood, you know. So I absolutely, though, thought that was kind of a sign of, like, which is another reason why de-aging is stupid. Like, it's not so much, like... Once again, it's the idea of necessity. Because these characters have to exist in those young scenes for hours, you know, what's the point then? Maybe they shouldn't have been casted. Maybe you should have casted a young... Now, I know why they were casted. I'm glad they were casted. I mean, that's what we all wanted. Mm-hmm. But at a certain point, are you servicing art, or is art servicing, you know, your shit? And it's just stupid.
I'm interested because I feel like this film at least creates the debate about it, and actually this is legitimately worthy of saying this isn't just some hack job garbage that's like, oh, they tried to do this full film de-aging and it looks like trash. Like, it actually does look pretty good most of the time. Yeah. But yes, there are a lot of little things that are just slipping between the cracks that don't seem to be even considered. We just mentioned them right there. Do we want to go to final thoughts? Does anybody have anything else we want to discuss as a group?
I can do final thoughts.
I'm good with final. Are you good with final?
I think I am. I may have a few more things to bring up.
On tangents.
Yep. So, but I'll let you guys go first, and I'll end.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't really have a lot to say that hasn't already been said, but I do want to say that this was a really awesome viewing experience. I think that it's a masterful film. I think that I really enjoyed a lot of the performances. I enjoyed the humor. The writing was incredible. And for, you know, it as long as it did feel at times that, like, watching it, like, I don't feel like there was there's no slack here. I don't think that there's any slack in this film where it's just like, oh, you could just easily cut out this part and it would just, like, flow so much better. It's like, no, I feel like it definitely earns its runtime. And I think that it certainly builds, and, like, I feel like there are 3 distinct acts that are separated between, like, those initial hours, and so, like, when you're at the 2-hour mark, like, you really do feel like you're entering into, like, the sort of end phase of just like, okay, this can't last forever. Like, we have to move on. Yeah, I would give this 4.5 out of 5. I really liked it a lot.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed this. I think. With regards to his crime films, or I should say his mob films, that I like this more than I like Goodfellas and Casinos. I liked it not, but almost as much as I like Mean Streets. That's probably still my favorite because that's just very personally up my alley with the era it came out and whatnot. But I find the 4 of those films interesting almost as like a passage of time and a chronological, because you have Mean Streets, in which you have these little band of criminals who never quite make it in. You know, like, they're just trying to be like their idols and whatever. And in fact, that's why I kind of consider them the most sympathetic out of all 4 movies, because they're never, like, bad enough to even be in with the rest of them or whatever. Then you have his, what I would say, middle section where you get the complete rise and fall. It's the people who get in, get to the top, have the weight on their, shoulders, and then suffer below it or beneath it and crash and burn, and it's whatever. And then at the other end of it, you now have the final say in it, where what happens if you get in and you don't truly, fall off the cliff? You just have no,
You see it through all the
yeah,
way
you
to
see
the
it
end.
through. And
Yeah.
is there an ending there? And I think the hollow answer is there's not, So it's almost, better to have a rise and fall story, because at least then you're going to be put out of your misery. But here, you're left with a lot more kind of spiritual questions, and I did kind of like that it was harkening back to his Catholic guilt days of Mean Streets and whatnot, because it's not quite on that level, obviously, but there were certainly some pointed conversations about, God and what his place is in, especially the way he very much takes up religion in his older years when he's talking to, and I love that. We get only a hint of that throughout the whole movie, and then the moment he's got nobody he's a believer, and then I saw her face, and and I love that he is enamored with the priest because he's the only person that will talk to him, and that's technically his job. That is a sad state of affairs. So it's definitely the gangster movie, the mob movie that he's made since Mean Streets that I'll be thinking about the most post viewing, and it's the one I want to rewatch the most. I'm between two ratings, and I'm going to be charitable and give it a 4 out of 5 for myself. In that, I don't really think it does anything wrong. These are never going to be my all-time favorite kind of movies, so there's a ceiling as to how much I'm enjoying it at any given moment. But basically, this is as good as cinema gets, even if it's not my personal favorite, anything, whatever. So 4 out of 5 for me, and I'm just so glad that all these boys were able to get back together and pitch in.
Band got back together again for
right.
one last rodeo.
And I will say I'm genuinely impressed by Al Pacino here. I mean, I'm impressed by just about everybody in the movie, Joe Pesci especially. But I can't believe that Al Pacino gave one of his maybe final, hoo-ha Al Pacino performances that is still stacked with pathos that he hasn't delivered in a long time. So, if anything, all that stuff was, I thought, great use of affectations and kind of posturing, because he has to be this very weird public figure, and the way it bled into his private life. So,
just to go off of what you were just referring to of Frank in his later years, when he's at pretty much the assisted living center, whatever you want to call it, and he's being helped by the nurse, and he's looking through his old photos, and she asks who that is with his daughter, and he says, "You don't know who that is? That's Jimmy Hoffa." First of all, I love that he's blown away that she doesn't know who Jimmy Hoffa is, and it totally makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
But this idea of shaming younger people that not knowing is somewhat comes full circle, as he does not know who Russell is early on in the very beginning of the film, and he kind of gives him that look as, "Oh, okay, we'll see," just assuming that he's going to be like, "Oh, yes, sir. Thank you for helping with my car, sir." And he's just like, "Oh, thanks. You probably own the gas station." I don't know. I just thought that was a very interesting parallel, especially because it's the very beginning and very end of the film.
Did not think about that, but that is very true.
The passage of generations.
Well, but really just repeating itself again, because some people just, why would you know who this old white man is?
Not only that, too, and not to punctuate it from the great parallel between the beginning and that ending moment, but taking that ending one aside too, that's also just a kind of a gut punch, because he's directly responsible for that, her not knowing, because the disappearance, maybe Jimmy Hoffa would have went on to have a slightly even more prolific life, who knows, or whatever. But I just think there's some very uncomfortable guilt in the way he's tied up to the fact that nobody knows who Jimmy Hoffa is nowadays, who wasn't alive during
There's
it.
only one thing that anybody knows about Jimmy Hoffa, and that's that
Right.
he disappeared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, doesn't she even say something like, "Oh, yeah, that's the guy," doesn't...
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think that ties into it, too, so...
Yeah. I do also love the detail that his car, which ultimately leads to his undoing, because he accepted it with paying less than it was worth, so it was some sort of bribe, and that's why he ended up going to jail. His car has a "Have you seen Jimmy Hoffa" bumper sticker on it, which is very fucked up, as he's the one who murdered him. So, circling back, I very much love this. On a second viewing, I could very much see myself giving this a perfect rating. I'm going to give it 4.5 out of 5 first pass through, just because I think that there are some small aspects of this that aren't perfect, the de-aging being part of it, but I can see myself getting past that to give this an even higher rating down the road. I'm just so excited that this film happened. I feel like, this is how I feel like Toussaint would have felt if somebody made a really good Ghost in the Shell film.
Oh my God, yes.
Or somebody made Akira and it was actually really good.
Jesus wept. I would. Oh my God.
Please stop this, Alex.
Well, okay, but
oh my God, here Mariah directing an Akira film and it's being fucking awesome. Oh my God,
Alex.
But
I would.
okay, I've done this to myself. I've done this to myself, but I will say
I want to live in that reality.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you have that though.
I want you to go there too.
Yeah.
But I love Martin Scorsese gangster films. Especially his later films that he made in the 90s. And I'm so excited that he was able to make one later in his career with the same people, and it was actually really good. It warms my heart. It gets me excited for other things that could potentially happen in cinema, but also, like, it'll always be a reflective moment for me looking back and just being so pumped that this really happened. And again, all these guys are probably going to be dead within the next 15 years.
And it was
not
worth
sooner.
it.
15.
Yeah, people live longer now, but I think that it could be less than that for some of them.
Oh, yeah.
Harvey Keitel wasn't looking too hot. All the aging in the world could help that.
I actually forgot to mention, but I do think Harvey Keitel was the only person where I'm like, maybe somebody else could have been in that role.
Oh, yeah.
Like, not because he was bad, but that definitely felt like stunt casting, where the other guys pulled it off, where it felt bigger than the event of just having them there.
He's there to have his name on the poster somewhere. Yeah. I agree.
What was he doing? Like Marlon Brando? Like,
I don't know. He does have the one scene where they're and it is a very pivotal scene, but when Frank is told that they know about whispers and he has to better not fuck around here, because if he lies, he's probably in big trouble, and he just tells the truth, and that is when he really becomes indebted.
You can
to
keep
Russell.
the money. And I was like, well, I can give it back. No, he's not going to need it. You can
That
keep
was the only real Keitel scene we had, and I actually think he is pretty good in it.
it was a
but
good scene, but
yeah,
there were just some weird, freaky moments when he was in the background, where I'm like,
yeah, it's just not really. Yeah, I don't know. Another thing, quickly before I get to my very final thoughts. Something that I didn't really know how to feel about, and I kind of like it, but I also kind of don't. So I'm really not sure. And that is something that keeps popping up throughout the entirety of the film. And I guess it goes away a little bit towards the end. But we keep getting the sort of explanation of what happens to these small characters that we don't really hear from. We see them, but don't hear them throughout here. And it'll just be like, was liked by all, lived to natural cause
the
death.
one
well,
guy.
to be fair, that was like the one.
I know,
joke.
but
Okay.
then there's
all the other ones were obituaries. like
pretty much like
deaths.
shot 6 times in the head, or
Died by a nail bomb.
yeah, died by a nail bomb. Whoa, boy. So I feel like part of me says that just feels super lazy, but the other part of me says that these characters were never going to be part of it at all. This is just showing us that every single person that's around them is a bad person who's going to get their comeuppance at some point.
I didn't even take it as either one of those, where I thought in most of his gangster movies, as I kind of talked about earlier, about how this one really takes the sexiness out of it, I just thought it was a great way to not even fuck around with any semblance of anybody of these people living a decent life and or winning, so to speak.
This is the natural trajectory of that sort of lifestyle, in that the ability to actually like live to die of old age is an outlier.
Because when you join this club, that's not your goal, but that is the only way you exit. And so I do like the idea that it's basically every time you meet a person, they're dead before they can even.
Yeah, and that's why I'm definitely conflicted, because of my first initial reading of it was, this is kind of dumb. But as I went back and saw it again, I'm like, you know what? This actually works. So, okay, cool. I love this film. Joe Pesci and Al Pacino are delivering really, really high-level performances here. I really did like the loudness of Al Pacino's performance. I was admittedly a little disappointed that there wasn't an opportunity for a vintage Joe Pesci moment, but I'm willing to accept that it was purposeful for why he played the role the way he was. So I'm good with that. He does have one moment where he refers to somebody poorly, and I will say I had to grab that little tiny grasp of actual real Joe Pesci and be like, oh, this is it. So I love this movie. I thought it was very good, and I'm just so excited that this is actually a thing, and we'll see what Martin Scorsese does next. I know he's got all these different projects with potentially Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, and Devil in the White City he's possibly going to be involved in. So we'll see where he goes from here, but I don't think there's anywhere to go higher for him at this point. This is probably the peak of this part of his life, and I'm just excited that it is as good as it is. So, 4.5 out of 5 for me for The Irishman.
Till he ends up in a Marvel film.
Probably not.
We'll see.
I would guess that they're not going to be working together.
We'll see.
We'll see. So, if you have any thoughts on The Irishman, or I Heard You Paint Houses, whichever title you want to
I forgot to mention that in my final thoughts. The Irishman is still a very stupid title, and it should have been called I Heard You Paint Houses.
I mean, it's even still in the titles of the film.
So that's why
so much so we thought it was a chapter heading.
I had read about it, so I kind of knew that was coming.
Yeah.
But it's just a much more evocative title, and the phrase in the body of the work itself is great and wonderfully utilized.
Well, when this gets its Criterion release, maybe it'll have its real title.
Yeah.
We'll see. Anyways, if you out there have any thoughts on this film, whatever you want to call it, always feel free to send them on to us at filmtankshow@gmail.com, or you can hook up with us on Facebook or Twitter.
Yeah, hook up with us.
Ooh, boy.
Hello.
At Film Tank Show. And you can also find this and all of our episodes on filmtankshow.com, or also on Apple Podcast or Stitcher or a host of other places as well. Coming up on episode 211, our friend Sam will be back as we are going to talk about another new release, which is Rian Johnson's Knives Out. Definitely a film that I was interested in. The reviews have been pretty positive. So we'll see what everybody thinks.
Yeah.
Coming up on our next episode. So, from myself, Alex Diekman, also Nick Cheney and Toussaint Egan, thank you very much to everyone for listening to us here at Film Tank. We'll catch up with you next time.
Hey!
Hey!
Hey!